Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jessica Dishon. Jessica Dishon was born on May 2, 1982, in the small town of Shepherdsville, Kentucky, USA. It was a quiet place where many residents made their living from farming and were very close to one another. Jessica had two younger brothers, Christopher and Michael. From a young age, she helped her parents, Mike and Edna, take care of them while they were at work. This made Jessica more independent, and her parents could always count on her. When she was 15, she started working part-time at a local restaurant, saving money to buy her first car. She dreamed of owning a red Pontiac, and after a few years, she had saved enough money to make this dream come true. Despite her part-time job, Jessica still achieved very good academic results and began planning to go to college to become an accountant. In the fall of 1999, when Jessica was 17, she entered her senior year and started dating a boy, which made her very excited. On the morning of Friday, September 10th, as usual, Jessica's parents went to work while she was still sleeping, and her younger brothers went to the bus stop and then to school. Jessica stayed home and was supposed to drive to school by herself. However, right after her brothers left, around noon, her mother, Edna, returned home and immediately noticed something strange. Jessica's car was parked in front of the house, even though she was supposed to be in class at that time. Edna went to Jessica's room, guessing that she might have overslept and not gone to school. However, Jessica was not in her bedroom. Edna then thought that, for some reason, Jessica might have asked her father, Mike, to drive her to school. She immediately called Mike, but he said he had gone to work alone that morning. Edna suspected that there was a problem with Jessica's car, so she took the spare key to try to start it. However, as she approached the car, she noticed a few disturbing things. The driver's door was slightly open. Jessica's cell phone was on the seat with the numbers 9 and 1 displayed on the screen, and under the front seat were a pair of shoes and her keys. In the back seat were her textbooks, work clothes, and purse. Edna immediately worried that the worst could have happened. It was clear that someone had tried to call 911 from Jessica's phone but couldn't get through. Furthermore, Jessica couldn't have left all her belongings in the car and left unexpectedly. Her family lived in the suburbs, so she would have had to walk several miles. Jessica's parents called the school and learned that she had missed class. However, the school did not notify them as they should have. A few hours later, Jessica's best friend from the place where they both worked called her parents, saying that Jessica had not shown up for her shift, which made them even more worried. Worried about Jessica's absence from school and work, as well as her belongings, including her phone with the 9 and 1 dial displayed being left in an unlocked car, her parents decided to call the police. However, the sheriff simply assumed that Jessica might have wandered off and would eventually return home. He did not notice that one of her shoes was left in the car, making it difficult for her to travel far without it. Jessica's parents tried to convince the sheriff that their daughter might be in danger, but despite their pleas, he refused to open an investigation, leaving them with no choice but to return home. After that, her parents took it upon themselves to search for her and contact acquaintances, but no one had any information about her. The next day, her parents returned to the sheriff and reported that Jessica had not returned home. This time, the police went to check Jessica's car but found another problem. The officers had searched the car without gloves, touching everything inside with their bare hands. They also did not follow standard procedure for checking Jessica's room. Jessica's parents, once again frustrated with the lack of professionalism from law enforcement, so sought the help of local media to draw attention to their daughter's disappearance and the police's lack of concern. Together with relatives and friends, they searched on their own and distributed flyers with information about Jessica. The search was led by Jessica's father and his brother, who were familiar with the area. Fearing the worst, they decided to search near a local river. The area had a bad reputation as it was dense, isolated, and popular with drug dealers and other criminals. For hours, Jessica's relatives searched the difficult terrain along the river but found no trace of her. The next morning, something unusual happened. Jessica's parents were at home, and their son was playing in the yard. Suddenly, the boy ran into the house, saying he heard a cry for help that sounded like his sister's. Jessica's father immediately grabbed the shotgun and ran outside to find the source of the cry. At the same time, his brother drove up to the house to join the search. Not long after, they noticed smoke coming from the property of their neighbor, a 40-year-old man named David Brooks. When they approached, they saw him burning something on the ground, which looked very suspicious. Jessica's father asked David for permission to search his farm. However, David refused and asked them to leave. It was not just David's strange behavior that was noteworthy. Before Jessica's disappearance, her family had maintained a normal relationship with David and his family. However, after Jessica went missing, David began to act strangely. He often drove slowly past Jessica's family's house and stared at them with a disturbing expression. Additionally, Jessica's parents received strange phone calls from a man who only panted without saying anything. Jessica's family suspected David might have had something to do with their daughter's disappearance, but they could not understand why he was behaving so oddly. Jessica's parents decided to contact the police again, despite having previously failed to get significant attention from the agency. They shared their observations, urged the officers to search David's property with dogs, and agreed to use Jessica's clothes to search for clues. The dogs led them to a fire pit on David's property, but they found no significant evidence. However, they did discover a pair of black gloves in one of the sheds, which indicated the presence of an odor associated with decomposition. Despite David's suspicious behavior, the police were still unable to connect him to Jessica's disappearance, and once again, they came up empty-handed. Frustrated with the local police, Jessica's father decided to contact the FBI. While the FBI typically did not investigate if only based on calls from relatives of missing persons, they decided to get involved immediately due to the disturbing facts presented by Jessica's parents. After a careful investigation, the FBI concluded that something truly terrible might have happened to Jessica. From this point on, a real investigation began, one that the local police had been reluctant to conduct. FBI agents collected fingerprints from Jessica's room and car, seized all potential evidence for analysis, and sent it to the lab. They also organized an extensive ground search using helicopters and gathered volunteers. Additionally, they thoroughly examined the bottom of the pond near Jessica's house, considering the possibility that her body might be there. FBI agents conducted a thorough search of David's farm and found a printed photo of Jessica. After this discovery, detectives were almost certain that David was involved in her disappearance. They also suspected his 35-year-old brother, Joseph, because he acted strangely while police were searching his property. Although investigators did not find enough evidence to arrest the brothers, they focused their efforts on thoroughly searching the area, as it was becoming increasingly likely that Jessica was no longer alive. On September 27, 17 days after Jessica went missing, police received a call from a woman driving along the road near where Jessica's father had been searching for her. The woman had seen a strange object near a tree on the side of the road and decided to check it out. The woman was shocked to discover it was a body. She immediately called the police. The FBI arrived at the scene and confirmed that the body was that of a young woman who was missing several fingers and toes. She had been bound with a rope that had traces of red and silver paint on her feet, and some of her clothing was also missing, suggesting that she had been sexually assaulted. Unfortunately, the state of decomposition of the body made it difficult to identify the victim. The police went to Jessica's home and asked her parents to assist in the identification process. Jessica's father was unable to look directly at body, but her mother agreed to do so. When she arrived at the scene, Edna initially could not identify her. However, Edna later noticed a small butterfly tattoo on the body that was identical to her daughter's and located in the same spot. Medical professionals later confirmed the deceased's identity as Jessica Dishon and determined that her cause of death was strangulation. Several bruises were also found on her body. The autopsy revealed that she had been alive for about 3 days after her disappearance, as her legs, arms, and fingers were still intact. This indicated that the police had a chance to save her, but they did not take any action to do so. After Jessica's body was discovered, the FBI decided to re-interview David. In the first interview, David claimed to have seen Jessica near her home on the morning she went missing. However, in a subsequent interview, he changed his story, stating that he had not seen her at all that day. He then claimed that he had been home in bed with his wife that morning. When detectives questioned David's wife, she contradicted his account. The FBI continued to question David, asking him what he would do if they found his fingerprints on the victim's body, even though no such evidence was discovered. David's response was suspicious. He said he would have to confess everything in that case. He subsequently failed a polygraph test, prompting the FBI to arrest him and proceed with trial. Although no solid evidence linked David to the murder, there were troubling circumstantial signs of his involvement, and the likelihood of a guilty verdict remained relatively low. Investigators continued to seek additional evidence as they prepared for trial. They recalled finding a rope similar to the one used to bind the victim's legs during a search of David's car. However, no DNA was found on it, making it an inconclusive piece of evidence. The trial began in January 2003, and David's attorney argued that there was insufficient evidence to convict his client. During the investigation, authorities discovered several missing body parts of the victim near the scene. They placed the parts in special containers and turned them over to local police, provide the requirement to keep them in a refrigerator. However, they left the containers at room temperature, which caused the parts to decompose quickly. Because the DNA and other evidence against David were not strong enough and the jury could not reach a unanimous decision, he was released. Under state law, he could only be charged again if new evidence was found. For Jessica's parents, this was a devastating blow. They were almost certain that David was the culprit behind their daughter's death. Furthermore, if the police had taken their job more seriously, their daughter might have been saved. Ultimately, they lost all hope for justice. In the years that followed, the case remained unsolved and gradually faded from memory. In 2012, a new detective, Lynn Hunt, joined the local police department. She was assigned to investigate cold cases, initially focusing on the murder of Jessica Dishon. When she reviewed the case files, she was shocked by the negligence of her predecessors. Most of the documents were filled with errors, lacked references to conversations with interested parties, and the evidence was not properly documented. The case had been handled so inefficiently that she had to start the investigation from scratch, although already 13 years after the murder. Lynn's first step was to contact Jessica's family. One of Jessica's brothers, now grown and living on his own, gave Lynn a box of Jessica's belongings that had been taken from her car. He had kept it since the police returned the items to the family. Lynn was once again confronted with her colleagues' poor handling of evidence, as it had not been properly stored. Although, after all these years, these items were unlikely to help her, she persisted in examining everything she could find. Through her research, she discovered information about David's medical examination results, which showed that his IQ was only 61, extremely low. This raised concerns about police operations, particularly regarding the questioning of him. Based on his significantly low IQ, he may not have fully understood the questions and may have given incomplete answers. This could indicate that he may not have been involved in the case, as his unusual behavior could be explained by his extremely low IQ. After a thorough investigation of everyone involved or living near the scene, nearly 15 years after Jessica's death, a colleague from another department called Lynn and shared new information from an inmate at the Kentucky State Prison who claimed to know the true identity of Jessica's killer. Lynn approached this lead with skepticism because, many times, when inmates try to provide information to the police, the end result is often frustration and wasted time. Many of them make up stories in hopes of getting released early or improving their prison conditions. However, she understood that this lead could not be ignored without verification. She visited the prison and met a man who was said to have relevant information. According to the man, he had shared a cell with a convicted child molester, the same crime as him. They became friends and exchanged details about their crimes. One day, the inmate told him that he had killed Jessica. The informant then revealing the man's name. It was Stanley Dish, Jessica's uncle and her father's younger brother. According to the informant, Stanley had confessed that he had sexually abused Jessica for years while they lived in the same household. Stanley had threatened to kill Jessica or her relatives if she spoke out. In the spring of 1999, when Jessica had a boyfriend, Stanley began to fear that she would eventually reveal her abuse by him. On the morning of September 10th, Stanley went to Jessica's home while she was alone. Jessica was getting into her car to leave when Stanley asked her to break up with her boyfriend. Jessica refused and threatened to report him if he did not leave her alone. When he refused, Stanley began to threaten Jessica. She tried to call 911, but Stanley grabbed her. Eventually, Jessica broke free and ran into the house. Stanley chased her down, beat her, then tied her up with bed sheets and took her to a nearby abandoned warehouse, where she was later found dead. Stanley held her captive for a long time, torturing and mentally abusing her before killing her. He then moved her body to a visible location near the road and buried it beneath the warehouse. He also claimed that after the murder, he had dismembered some of her body parts, hoping to deceive the police into thinking it was a drug deal gone wrong. Detective Lynn realized that information about the dismembered body parts had never been made public. Only Jessica's closest friends knew about it, so the informant could not have made this up. Finally, the man added that Stanley had buried Jessica's shoe under a broken tree near the shed. Lynn decided to verify all this information by searching for evidence. However, the local police station was short-staffed, so no one there could help her. She contacted Jessica's brother and a few other relatives, who agreed to join the search. She didn't tell them that Stanley might be the killer because she wanted to find some evidence to support these shocking accusations first. On the first day, they didn't find any clues in the heavy rain. They dug in areas that matched the description, but to no avail. The next day, Jessica's brother and Lynn returned to the scene. On the way, he showed her an abandoned shed on the side of the road. They went there and started digging inside, and almost immediately found a significant breakthrough. They discovered a buried bedsheet. Lynn collected this evidence and quickly went to Jessica's house. Over the years, Jessica's room had been kept exactly as it had been when her missing. Thanks to this, Lynn was able to confirm that the bedsheet found was part of Jessica's bedding, as it was not on the bed, and the other linens had the same pattern. Shortly after the evidence was discovered, Stanley was arrested and questioned. Although he appeared very nervous during the interrogation, he still refused to admit to the crime. He was eventually charged with murder, and the case went to trial. Jessica's father, Mike, could not believe that his own brother would commit such a cruel act against his daughter. He went through a period of complete denial but eventually accepted this unbearable truth. He recalled that in the early days of Jessica's disappearance, it was Stanley who suggested searching for the body near the riverbank. However, during the search, he suddenly felt nauseous and was taken home by his brother. It turned out that this incident occurred just a few hundred meters from the warehouse where Jessica lived, suggesting that Stanley had deliberately distracted them from searching for her while she was still alive. During the preparation for the trial, Detective Lynn carefully researched Stanley's past. She discovered that he had a previous conviction for assaulting another girl in the family. In addition, several other women reported that he had sexually abused them when they were children. He often took advantage of his relationship to stay at the victims' homes, then committed the crimes by threatening them not to speak out. The police concluded that he had committed these acts over a period of 3 decades. However, Detective Lynn found that securing a murder conviction would be difficult due to the lack of direct evidence such as fingerprints or DNA. She dug deeper into the case and stumbled upon an old box of files that had not been examined. When she looked through the contents, she was shocked again by the incompetence of those who had originally handled the case. The box contained a letter dated June 26, 2002, in which another informant had written to the police with the same story that Lynn had only heard 12 years later from a Kentucky inmate. In the summer of 2002, Stanley had been convicted of assaulting an underage relative. During that time, he had told a fellow inmate, who happened to be a police informant, about killing Jessica. The fellow inmate had written a letter to the department handling the case, revealing the gruesome details of what Stanley had done to his niece. The police simply ignored the letter and, perhaps believing that David had been involved all those years ago, did not consider other suspects. Lynn was frustrated by the lack of professionalism from her colleagues. Had they paid more attention to their work, the case might have been solved in 2002. For years, Jessica's family could only wait for the trial, hoping that Stanley would finally face the justice that had been delayed for his actions. The case began in 2015, and Stanley proclaimed his innocence. In court, Jessica's parents could barely look at the relative who had destroyed their lives. They were also furious that he would not admit to his actions to help them gain closure. The prosecution was concerned that the chances of securing a conviction for murder were slim, mainly due to the lack of substantial evidence. They were also worried about the charges of assault against the other girls in the family, as these witnesses would have to come to court and describe Stanley's behavior toward them in detail. To clarify, the prosecutor negotiated a plea deal with Stanley. Under the terms of the deal, the death penalty would be waived if Stanley pleaded guilty to the assault on his relative and to Jessica's murder. Stanley agreed to the deal, however. Part of the agreement stipulated that he did not have to reveal any further details about the crime. Jessica's parents were unhappy about this, as they wanted to know the whole truth. In the end, Stanley was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 15 years. Stanley was sentenced at the age of 56 and could have been released at the age of 71. After the trial, Jessica's father stated that if his brother hadn't died in prison, he would have waited for him to figure things out for himself. In 2019, Stanley gave his first interview and insisted that he did not kill Jessica. He claimed he was on his way to work that morning, but 2 decades later, he couldn't prove it. He could not explain why 2 independent informants had similar stories, including details only the killer would know, such as where the bedsheets were buried. David Brooks stated that police had not ruled out his involvement in the case. Stanley, who knew him, may have asked for his help in disposing of the victim's belongings. Due to his low IQ, Brooks may not have understood the full extent of the situation. It is possible that he burned Jessica's clothes in a fire and that Stanley gave him gloves that had a scent detectable by dogs. However, the truth may never be revealed, as Brooks passed away in 2021 due to heart problems. On the 3rd day after Jessica went missing, her younger brother heard screams outside and thought it was his sister calling for help. However, it is impossible to say for certain what happened at that time. Jessica could still be alive, but Stanley might have kept her in a shed a few miles from her home. In this case, it is more likely that the child imagined the incident due to stress or that someone else was screaming. However, there is another theory, although it seems unlikely. We know that shortly after Jessica's father rushed out, Stanley drove up to the house, which indicates he was nearby. Therefore, it is possible that the girl was in his car with her mouth covered or unconscious. In spite of this hypothesis appears very unlikely.
June 22, 1980 was a Sunday. Early that morning, 25 years old, Stephanie Malin returned home at around 4 a.m. after finishing her shift as a waitress at a restaurant. Before going home, she stopped by a colleague's house, so by the time she got back, she was very exhausted. Everyone in the house was asleep. As she walked through the first floor, Stephanie noticed her 14-year-old cousin, Suzanne Bombardier, wasn't there. Suzanne usually waited on the living room sofa to greet her, but she assumed the girl must be elsewhere in the house. Despite calling Suzanne's name several times, she got no response. While the situation seemed odd, Stephanie wasn't alarmed. It was too early to search the house thoroughly, and she didn't want to wake her daughters, aged 5 and 6, who were sleeping in their room the night before. June 21st, Stephanie had asked Suzanne to babysit her girls. Suzanne loved spending time with the children and was excited to help. Known for being a responsible and kind teenager with excellent grades and big dreams for the future, Suzanne had eagerly accepted the task. Stephanie assumed Suzanne had fallen asleep in the children's room after putting them to bed. Feeling tired herself, Stephanie also went to bed without checking further. A few hours later, she woke up and began preparing breakfast for the kids. While she was in the kitchen, the phone rang. It was Suzanne's mother asking when her daughter would be coming home. Wanting to ask Suzanne directly, Stephanie went to the children's room, but found that the little girl wasn't there. Her daughters said Suzanne hadn't been in their room when they woke up and didn't know where she was. Growing concerned, Stephanie searched the entire house, from the first floor to the second, but Suzanne was nowhere to be found. It became clear that Suzanne hadn't spent the night at the house. Stephanie was alarmed. Stephanie called her own mother to inform her of Suzanne's disappearance. Both were confused, as Suzanne had always been a responsible teen. She never ran away, had no boyfriend, and certainly wouldn't leave young children alone in the house. Stephanie carefully searched for any clues about Suzanne's whereabouts, but found nothing. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, she and her mother contacted the police. Law enforcement officers arrived and began investigating. They asked when Suzanne was last seen. Stephanie recounted that on the evening of June 21st, she was preparing for her restaurant shift and asked Suzanne to watch the kids. After work, Stephanie planned to stop by a co-worker's birthday party. At around 8 p.m., Stephanie called home and asked Suzanne to bring her some clean clothes to work. Suzanne agreed and brought them. That was the last time Stephanie saw Suzanne. After delivering the clothes, Suzanne headed back home. Stephanie watched her cross the street and waved goodbye. This account was corroborated by Stephanie's daughters and her co-workers. The children confirmed that Suzanne returned home, gave them dinner, and helped tidy up their toys. They also remembered what Suzanne was wearing: a nightgown and a red robe. Suzanne wasn't dressed to go out, which suggested she wasn't planning to leave the house. After putting the children to bed, Suzanne intended to watch TV or read a pastime she enjoyed. She was supposed to spend the night at Stephanie's house and head home the next morning after breakfast. At around 1:30 a.m., while at her co-worker's birthday party, Stephanie called home again to check in. Suzanne answered promptly and reassured her that everything was fine. The children were safely asleep, and Suzanne, feeling tired, was getting ready for bed. This phone call was the last confirmed contact anyone had with Suzanne. Using eyewitness accounts, investigators pieced together a rough timeline of the incident. Suzanne disappeared within a 2-hour window between 1:30 a.m., when Stephanie last called home, and 4 a.m., when Stephanie returned home and realized Suzanne was missing. The police initially suggested she might have run away, but her mother and sister rejected this possibility. Suzanne was calm, mild-mannered, and had no history of conflict with her family or aggressive behavior. Her teenage years were uneventful, and there was no reason to believe she would have left voluntarily. Moreover, her belongings, including her bag, clothes, and shoes, were left behind. It was highly unlikely that she would have run away wearing just a robe and slippers. The possibility of a kidnapping was considered. Detectives theorized that burglars might have broken in and encountered Suzanne, either as an unintended witness or because she attempted to intervene. However, this seemed improbable. No valuables or belongings were missing from the home, according to Stephanie, and there were no signs of forced entry or a struggle. Given the lack of disturbance, detectives speculated that Suzanne may have voluntarily allowed someone she knew into the house or left with them willingly. The lack of any evidence of a struggle or violence in the home. Everything was undisturbed, added to the mystery. The children sleeping in adjacent rooms heard nothing unusual. Investigators also questioned nearby neighbors in the townhouse complex. Families in neighboring units, who might have overheard something through the walls, reported nothing suspicious. Suzanne's disappearance shocked the quiet neighborhood and became the focal point of concern throughout the district. From the start, the case appeared inexplicable, and detectives struggled to find solid leads. Authorities combed the area around the house and thoroughly searched the premises, but found no new evidence. Neighbors and Suzanne's school community were interviewed, but no one had valuable information. Residents hadn't seen any unusual people or vehicles in the area. That Sunday evening had been an ordinary night, and given the time period, CCTV cameras were not yet common. The lack of surveillance made it harder for detectives to progress, and the investigation hit a dead end. Desperate for leads, police appealed to the public for any information. They received tips from several witnesses, but none panned out. 5 days after Suzanne's disappearance, there were still no breakthroughs or new evidence. Detectives began to suspect the worst, that Suzanne may have been killed, though her family refused to accept this possibility and clung to hope that she would be found alive. In the meantime, Suzanne's family worked tirelessly to spread awareness of her disappearance. They plastered the streets with flyers and distributed them widely. Investigators examined the family's immediate environment, but found no one who posed a potential threat to Suzanne. Her social circle didn't include any troublemaking teens. Detectives also started reviewing the profiles of local criminals with histories of abuse or violent offenses, but each had a verified alibi. The case took a tragic turn on June 27th, about 100 kilometers from where Suzanne lived. A man fishing on the San Joaquin River spotted something unusual in the water. Upon closer inspection from his boat, he discovered the naked body of a girl, washed up by the riverbank near a bridge. The man immediately alerted the police. The body was retrieved and sent for forensic analysis. Although it had been in the water for several days and had begun to decompose, the decomposition was not severe enough to erase all evidence related to the case. The forensic expert determined that the girl had been abused, and her death was caused by a stab wound to the chest. The victim had no identification or personal belongings that could help identify her. Authorities began checking local missing person reports and found one from the Bombardier family that stood out. Due to the warm season and the body's exposure to water, the body had swollen, making identification difficult. Ultimately, dental records confirmed the victim was Suzanne Bombardier. The forensic team collected evidence related to the crime and made attempts to study the perpetrator, but the technology of the 1980s was limited. At the time, there was no database to compare information, so law enforcement could only file the collected evidence and continue the search. Suzanne's disappearance was later classified as a murder investigation, with two main suspects identified: a man with a history of violence who lived near Stephanie's home, and Stephanie's ex-boyfriend, who had been behaving erratically. Before Suzanne disappeared, he had begged Stephanie for a second chance, but left shortly after being rejected. There were no other suspicious individuals within Suzanne's circle who might have had access to her. Detectives carefully investigated both suspects, but found no solid evidence, no witnesses, fingerprints, or anything to directly link them to the crime. Eventually, the leads were dropped, and efforts to find the killer failed. The case materials were archived, leaving Suzanne's murder unsolved for years. 14-year-old Suzanne Bombardier was buried in Lafayette, leaving her family devastated. The tragedy deeply affected her mother, who fainted upon learning her daughter's body had been found. The blow was made even crueler when, shortly after the terrible news, Suzanne's school report card arrived, showing only excellent grades. The community was shaken and outraged by the failure to find her killer. Concerned citizens often called the police station with leads, but none of them proved to be useful. Over the years, investigators tried several times to analyze the criminal's DNA found on Suzanne's body. In the 1990s, despite progress in building DNA databases, poor sample quality and limited technology hampered the process. By the 2000s, the case had faded from public memory, remembered only by Suzanne's family and community elders determined to see justice served. In 2014, local journalist Jennifer Kathleen Gibbons learned about the case and was shocked that the killer had never been caught and might still be free. She located Suzanne's grave and started blogging about the crime, speaking in depth with Suzanne's family, residents, and retired detectives. Her regular posts reignited public interest in the case, sparking questions about why the killer remained unpunished. Although the police have not given up on the case, Jennifer's posts have increased public pressure, prompting the police to step up their investigation to find answers. In 2015, a newly formed cold case task force revisited Suzanne Bombardier's murder. Several police officers requested the sheriff's approval and resources to address this tragic unsolved case. DNA samples from Suzanne's case were retrieved from the archives, and the team, consisting of dedicated law enforcement professionals, began the challenging work of reviewing the decades-old evidence. Suzanne's case was the oldest unsolved violent crime in Antioch. The timing of the investigation was deliberate, as advancements in forensic technology could now analyze degraded or limited DNA samples, tools that hadn't been available during the original investigation. With renewed hope and determination, investigators sought to finally bring Suzanne's killer to justice. Nearly 40-year-old evidence was sent to the San Mateo County Medical Examiner's Lab, enabling investigators, for the first time, to create a complete DNA profile of the killer. Previous efforts had failed due to inadequate technology, but this time was different. In early 2017, armed with the DNA profile, investigators compared it to a database of registered criminals. To their surprise, the results pointed to Mitchell Lynn Bacon, a major breakthrough in the case. Initially skeptical, detectives conducted additional tests, cross-checking the profile with the FBI DNA database. The results confirmed a match. Mitchell Lynn Bacon, born on March 21, 1954, in a small town near Racine, California. He had lived in Antioch, where he crossed paths with Stephanie and Suzanne. He had long been a suspect in Suzanne's murder, but a lack of evidence had prevented charges until now. In 1973, Mitchell had been convicted of multiple crimes, including assault, and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Though the charges could have warranted life imprisonment, leniency was granted due to his lack of a prior record. After serving his sentence, he was arrested again in 1981 for more violent crimes and received a 24-year prison sentence. His offenses primarily involved abuse. Upon his release, he was required to register as an abuser offender but failed to do so. This violation led to another 4-year prison sentence in 2002, officially entering him into criminal databases. When police tracked down 63-year-old Mitchell in 2017, he was still living in Antioch. He was arrested calmly as he returned from the store. Despite overwhelming evidence, he denied any involvement in Suzanne's murder. After his arrest, detectives held a press conference, announcing plans to compare his DNA to other unsolved cases. By the time of his capture, he had lived unpunished for 37 years. His methods resembled those of a serial killer, prompting suspicions that he might be linked to additional murders. For Suzanne's family, justice finally seemed within reach. One of the key obstacles to convicting Mitchell in 1980 had been his alibi. He claimed he had been with his aunt at a bar in a nearby town, far from Suzanne's babysitting location. According to him, he left the bar around 2 a.m., stopped at an intersection, visited a convenience store where the clerk recognized him, and then drove home. His aunt and the store clerk both corroborated his story, creating a plausible, albeit tight, timeline that cast doubt on his involvement. This alibi prevented investigators from conclusively linking him to the crime, even though he was considered the most likely suspect. Stephanie, however, had long believed Mitchell was involved in her cousin Suzanne's murder. As someone who had interacted with the family during their brief relationship, Mitchell had earned Suzanne's trust, a trust that tragically sealed her fate. On the night of the murder, she unknowingly let him in, unaware of the danger he posed. Stephanie had ended her relationship with Mitchell after just 3 dates, finding him unsettling. After their breakup, Mitchell began regularly visiting the restaurant where she worked, sitting at a nearby table and silently watching her without ordering anything. His alarming behavior foreshadowed the darker truth that would come to light decades later. Stephanie felt intimidated by Mitchell's behavior and chose to cut off all contact with him. However, he refused to leave her alone. He left notes on her doorstep and repeatedly showed up at her workplace, attempting to reconnect. Stephanie later learned that one of her colleagues had given him her home address. The colleague claimed ignorance of their breakup, but this act put Suzanne in danger and ultimately led to her kidnapping, abuse, and murder. In 1980, during the investigation, Mitchell was offered a polygraph test, which he agreed to take. However, the results were inconclusive. Despite multiple interrogations, Mitchell never confessed, and due to insufficient evidence, he couldn't be definitively linked to the crime. Finally, 37 years later, he was arrested and charged with murder, kidnapping, and abuse. A forensic expert couldn't determine whether Suzanne had been abused before or after her murder. The prosecutor debated whether to pursue life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty. Mitchell continued to deny his involvement in the murder. Ultimately, the prosecution opted for life imprisonment, as seeking the death penalty could result in prolonged legal battles and appeals. In such cases, defense lawyers often file repeated appeals, forcing the victim's family to continually relive the tragedy. Additionally, given Mitchell's age, it was uncertain whether he would live long enough to face execution. Once the decision for a life sentence was made, an official reconstruction of events followed. The prosecution argued that Mitchell coerced Suzanne into leaving her house since she would never have abandoned her young nieces under any circumstances. It was believed that Mitchell threatened Suzanne with a knife, forcing her to leave her home. Her family believed she sacrificed herself to protect her nieces from harm. According to the prosecution, Suzanne was killed with a knife that had a blade at least 15 centimeters long. The blade was sharp enough to pierce her heart with a single fatal strike, causing near-instant death. The prosecution also contended that Mitchell used the same knife to threaten her during the abduction. After committing the crime, he disposed of Suzanne's body. It is believed that Mitchell took Suzanne to a remote location, where he abused her and then killed her with immense force, nearly piercing her body completely. The prosecution argued that Mitchell abused her again after her death. The defense took an unusual approach. They argued, citing a state law that imposes a lighter sentence for abuse of a corpse, that the abuse occurred after Suzanne was dead, and that Mitchell was not involved in her kidnapping or murder. Instead, they claimed he found Suzanne's lifeless body and took advantage of the situation. This argument was strengthened by the lack of evidence proving Suzanne's abduction. There were no signs of forced entry or a struggle at Stephanie's home, giving the defense room to create doubt. However, the prosecution still had critical evidence to counter these claims. Mitchell's criminal history followed a clear and troubling pattern across several recorded incidents. In 1973, he was arrested after being suspected of abuse an underage girl during a burglary. During the investigation, it was revealed that he was guilty of another crime, which led to charges of abuse, burglary, and assault with intent to kill. Following his release, he broke into another home in a different city where he committed robbery and abused a schoolgirl. During the assault, he tied up the victim, burned her with a cigarette, and stabbed her with a knife. Miraculously, the girl survived. The victim recalled Mitchell's unsettling behavior during the attack. He appeared to enjoy his actions immensely, humming and laughing to himself like a deranged individual. The physical and emotional scars left on the survivor required a long recovery. Prosecutors argued that the similarities between these crimes provided significant evidence linking him to the kidnapping and murder of Suzanne Bombardier. The trial for Suzanne's case was set for March 2022. After Mitchell's arrest, a press conference highlighted the persistent efforts of the detectives who had volunteered to investigate Antioche's oldest case. The police also credited the media's role in keeping Suzanne's story alive through reports published in 2015 and 2016. Authorities stressed the possibility of Mitchell being involved in other violent crimes around the U.S. In their appeal to the public, they urged anyone with information about his involvement in other crimes to contact the Antioche Police Department. They reassured people that Mitchell was now in custody and posed no threat, encouraging past victims or witnesses to come forward. However, no one responded to their call for information. The trial concluded on March 15, 2022, when the jury unanimously convicted Mitchell Lynn Bacon of first-degree murder, as well as other charges such as robbery, kidnapping, and abuse. On June 27, 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. During his sentencing hearing, a chilling revelation emerged. A former prisoner claims Mitchell confessed to systematically abusing and killing escort girls while working as a truck driver, traveling across the country for years. Authorities are currently investigating these claims to uncover evidence of these alleged crimes. However, Mitchell has denied these accusations, calling his former cellmate's story a fabrication. The search for truth continues as authorities work to determine whether Mitchell is responsible for more atrocities. The relationship between parents and their adult children is affected by various factors that start to develop during childhood. One of the most important factors is parenting style, which can foster trust, cooperation, and support, or, conversely, cause control and strict discipline. The McCullough family initially appeared to be a typical middle-class family, educated, financially secure. The strict parents raised 5 children, teaching them what they believed were proper morals and life goals. However, the children had a different view. As they grew older, they moved away and kept in touch with their aging parents only occasionally through text messages. They did not know that both of their parents had unexpectedly passed away 4 years ago. The truth emerged only when the family's doctor expressed concerns. The McCullough family resided in a large 3-story house in a peaceful upper-middle-class neighborhood in Great Baddow, Essex, England. The family was led by John McCullough, a respected professor at a prestigious university known for his research on autism spectrum disorders. His wife, Lois, dedicated herself to maintaining a well-organized home and raising their children. In October 1988, they welcomed their youngest child, a daughter named Virginia. At that time, both parents were in their 40s. Although Virginia's arrival was unexpected, the McCullough viewed it as a blessing due to their strong religious beliefs. The McCullough children were raised in a strict environment filled with discipline. Their household followed a rigid schedule, with each child responsible for specific tasks. Disobedience often resulted in physical punishment. For instance, Lois once used a belt on her child so harshly that the girl ended up with visible bruises, which led child welfare services to investigate the McCullough home. Even after many years together, Lois and John reportedly did not show much affection for each other. They slept in separate bedrooms, communicated in a reserved manner, and did not display any tenderness, such as hugs or kisses. This lack of affection extended to their children. The McCullers seldom expressed warmth or praise, as they believed it would spoil their kids. Instead, they commonly punished minor infractions. The children were expected to excel academically and help with household chores, but they were not allowed to visit friends or have guests over. Discipline was strictly enforced, and breaking the rules was not tolerated. Lois faced obsessive-compulsive disorder from a young age, along with misophobia, the fear of germs and dirt. This resulted in her compulsive cleaning and frequent disinfection of her home. Pets were not allowed, and her children were required to keep their rooms to her strict standards. Lois would often conduct surprise checks. Any hint of dust or disorder would lead to harsh punishments. As time went on, her mental health worsened. She became even more withdrawn, avoiding interaction with neighbors completely. She only left the house when necessary and rushed back as soon as she could. In her later years, she stopped making eye contact and kept her head down to minimize interactions. In addition to her existing fears, she developed agoraphobia, which left her nearly unable to leave her home. John, Lois's husband, had diabetes, which caused his eyesight to deteriorate quickly. By his 70s, he had retired from teaching and was living on a small pension. Similar to Lois, John rarely went out. When he did run errands, he often didn't greet others, not because he was rude, but because he struggled to recognize faces due to his poor vision unless someone spoke to him directly. Once the older children became adults, they moved out of the McCullough household and spread across the country. They created their own lives and families, keeping in touch with their parents mainly through occasional phone calls or, more commonly, text messages. This pattern illustrated the emotional distance within the McCullough family, as they did not have a tradition of celebrating holidays together or marking special occasions at home. For the grown children, it was sufficient to know that their parents were well taken care of by their youngest sibling, who continued to live in the family home. Virginia, the youngest of the McCullough children, stood apart from her older sisters. Unlike them, she didn't rush to leave home after high school. From a young age, Virginia was seen as odd and introverted. While her siblings had limited social lives due to their parents' strict rules, such as prohibiting guests and outings, Virginia took her isolation further. She found it difficult to connect even with her brothers and sisters. Instead of engaging with others, she often talked to herself and created complex stories which were mistaken for real events, leading others to label her a compulsive liar. However, she didn't seem bothered by her lack of social connections. Her parents believed that Virginia was destined by a higher power to care for them in their old age. Her absence of a personal life, lack of dating, and tendency to avoid people were seen as completely normal by Lois and John. They accepted her role as their caregiver as her true calling. It is uncertain whether Virginia pursued any formal education after high school, but it seems likely as her parents valued education highly. However, she struggled to maintain a stable career due to her unusual behavior and tendency to be dishonest. At one point, Virginia worked as a bartender at a local pub and also had a job at the post office. But mostly she spent her time at home, assisting her parents with household tasks. Whenever her parents asked why she wasn't working, Virginia had convincing explanations. She claimed to have been unfairly dismissed, was actively job hunting, or was waiting for a response from a large company that had reviewed her application. As her parents aged, they became increasingly less worried about her situation. By the time John was in his 70s, his vision had significantly declined. He had almost no sight in one eye and blurred vision in the other. Lois's anxiety had also intensified over the years, and she only ventured out for medical appointments with their family therapist, who managed their health and adjusted their treatments. Lois and John seldom interacted with neighbors and appeared to be content with their lifestyle, especially knowing Virginia would always be there to look after them. Virginia spent a significant amount of time on the computer, mostly playing games. She told her parents she was actively seeking work and sending out her resume to various companies. However, as time went on, she was unable to secure a job. To continue living off her parents Without earning their disapproval, she devised a plan to elicit their pity instead. Knowing her parents were very concerned about health, they regularly went for medical checkups and took their medications on time. Virginia began to complain about her own health, fabricating serious conditions she didn't have. To make her claims more convincing, she visited doctors and described symptoms she found online. She underwent various tests and blood work, but none of her conditions were ever confirmed. She told her parents she was diagnosed with diabetes, which she claimed to have inherited from her father, along with heart problems. She also mentioned having a tumor that required urgent surgery. Concerned for her well-being, John and Lois provided her with money for treatment. In 2017, Virginia unexpectedly announced her pregnancy but never disclosed who the father was. John and Lois were taken aback by the news but were willing to embrace an illegitimate grandchild. They reasoned that their daughter, who was nearly 30 and single, could use someone to care for after they were gone. However, Virginia's deception escalated. She even purchased a fake pregnancy belly online to maintain the charade, but after a few months, she claimed to feel unwell and went to the hospital. Upon her return, she told her parents that she had lost the baby. John and Lois grieved this loss, unaware that their daughter had merely tricked them. Virginia asked her parents if she could take full control of their finances and accounts. Since her parents didn't understand modern technology and rarely left their home, they agreed. This decision gave Virginia complete access to the family accounts and bank cards, allowing her to use them however she wanted. At that time, Virginia had developed a habit of impulsive shopping. Now she had the means to support it. Every day, she ordered various unnecessary items from online stores, with most of them never even being opened. She would stash the packages away in a closet, under her bed, or in the storage room. However, there was one purchase, a kitchen appliance, that she gave to her mother, and it was well received. Her mother appreciated the gift genuinely, even praised Virginia, which was a rare occurrence. In early 2018, Virginia suddenly believed she was an artist, turned her room into an art studio, filled with paints, an easel, and supplies. She told her parents that art experts had praised her work, that her paintings would be shown in a contemporary art gallery soon. She even claimed she would become famous and make a lot of money. However, from the mid-2000s to the mid-2010s, Virginia started visiting online casino sites regularly, where she placed bets and lost money. Over time, her gambling problem worsened. After accessing her parents' savings, she began increasing her bets until she lost all their money. John and Lois were unaware that they were nearly bankrupt. They couldn't check their account balance because they didn't have access to online banking. At that time, Virginia had begun taking out loans using their names, indulging in frivolous purchases and gambling away their savings. This situation couldn't continue indefinitely. No one was making payments on the loans, and as Virginia kept borrowing more money, their debt continued to increase along with the accumulating interest. One day, the bank called their home phone, and John answered. They informed him about the large debts and unpaid loans. John felt faint, nearly had a heart attack upon hearing this news. He immediately told his wife. Together, they went to confront their daughter, Virginia, demanding an explanation. Virginia, pretending to be surprised, promised them that she would investigate the issue. She then sat at her computer, typed for a few minutes, claimed that hackers had accessed her account, stolen their money, and taken out loans in their name. Virginia assured her parents that she would resolve the problem and that they would recover their stolen money within the next few months. She pretended to be active and told her parents she had reported the criminals to the police, assuring them that they would be caught and everything would be returned. Virginia claimed that the issue had been solved, stating that the money was back in their account and that there were no loans to worry about for a while. John and Lois felt relieved, but 6 months later, they were contacted again about their accumulating debts. This time, Virginia convinced them that there had been a mistake in the bank's system and incorrect information had been shared. She was very convincing. Her elderly parents trusted her once more. Virginia realized that her situation was not sustainable. She had been borrowing money and understood that the bank would eventually demand repayment. Her parents would continue to receive calls, raising more questions about her financial situation. Sooner or later, they would see through her lies. If she continued to deceive them, they might even take the drastic step of contacting the authorities to find out what was really happening with their finances. Virginia carefully considered how she could continue living in her parents' house, using their money and taking loans in their names without facing any consequences. Surprisingly, her older siblings were completely oblivious to the situation. They rarely called their parents and visited them even less. In the meantime, John and Lois never expressed any concerns or complaints to their children. By March 2019, the situation had reached a critical point. Virginia realized she needed to take decisive action. Tragically, her plan was disturbing. She decided to kill her elderly parents. She knew she had to do this covertly, ensuring that no one would suspect anything and that everyone would continue to believe John and Lois were living happily in their spacious home. Fortunately, since they had always been reclusive, it was unlikely that the neighbors would notice anything amiss. Due to chronic health issues, Lois and John often needed various medications, and Virginia was in charge of managing their prescriptions. However, Virginia began to change the dosages of her mother's sedatives, blood pressure medications, and psychiatric drugs over several months without their knowledge. In doing so, she secretly harmed her parents while closely monitoring how they responded to the altered medications. Lois and John, believing their health issues were just typical seasonal problems and trusting their daughter, did not seek medical help for their worsening condition. They thought their symptoms would resolve on their own since they had experienced similar issues in the past. In early June 2019, Virginia collected enough strong prescription medications to potentially kill both her parents. She purchased a sharp kitchen knife along with tools for crushing pills. On June 17, 2019, Virginia made the decision that this would be the final day for her father and mother. She acted normally, making sure not to raise any suspicions. She prepared dinner, went shopping, and assisted her mother with various household tasks. In the evening, she sat with her parents while they watched television and later made them a lethal cocktail that would ensure they wouldn't wake up the next day. Her father sometimes enjoyed a small amount of strong alcohol from his collection of expensive bottles, which he had spent years accumulating. Now, in retirement, he took pleasure in tasting different drinks from his collection. Virginia mixed a deadly dose of heart medication into a bottle of aged whiskey. The alcohol concealed the bitter taste of the pills. However, her mother, Lois, did not drink alcohol. For her mother, Virginia prepared herbal tea and claimed the unusual bitterness came from medicinal herbs that were harmless. Lois, however, chose not to finish the tea. After drinking, John went to his room and Virginia assisted him, wishing him good night. She left her mother's tea on the bedside table, hoping Lois would drink it before heading to her own room. Virginia glanced at her mother through the partially open door before going to bed. That night, she slept peacefully, without any feelings of guilt or doubt. The next morning, she took her time and stayed under the covers until almost 11, a rare luxury in their household. She figured that if no one had come by to check on her and tell her to get up by that time, no one would. First, she entered her father's room and found him in bed, appearing to be peacefully asleep. When Virginia touched his hand, she realized it was cold and stiff, indicating that he had died shortly after going to sleep. His heart couldn't cope with the mixture of medications and alcohol, leading to his passing. Next, Virginia entered her mother's bedroom and discovered that Lois hadn't finished her drink. Although she was alive, Lois was unable to get out of bed because of the heavy sedatives she had taken. She felt disoriented and confused, struggling to understand her surroundings. Lois asked Virginia what time it was. Virginia replied that it was still early, suggesting that her mother could go back to sleep after she turned on her favorite radio station. Virginia left the room and went to the utility closet, where she took out a sharp knife and a hammer that she had bought earlier. It was clear she didn't have a solid plan, but she believed these tools would help her finish what she had started. When Virginia returned to her mother's room, Lois was smiling and listening to her favorite song, completely unaware of her daughter's presence. Virginia hesitated for a moment, then raised the hammer, brought it down forcefully onto Lois's head. Blood began to flow from the injury, but Lois calmly looked at her daughter and asked what she was doing. Without answering, Virginia grabbed the knife, started to stab her mother in the neck and chest in a frantic manner. Within a few minutes, the brutal attack was over. Virginia dropped the bloody knife on the floor, knelt down, and held her mother's still warm hand. She sat silently for about half an hour before going to the shower to wash off the blood and change into clean clothes. The next day, Virginia remained at home with her parents' bodies, trying to decide how to handle the situation. She thought about different ways to dispose of them, but soon realized it would be nearly impossible to discreetly remove and bury the bodies. The neighbors might notice something unusual. She lacked the physical strength to move both bodies and dig graves. Ultimately, Virginia came up with a bleak solution. She decided to seal her parents inside the house. However, executing this plan would take a lot of effort. She started by visiting a sporting goods store where she purchased 2 sleeping bags to serve as makeshift coffins. Next, she went to a hardware store and bought many rolls of plastic sheeting, cement mix, expanding foam, and cinder blocks, which were delivered to her home. When the neighbors inquired, Virginia said her father was working on a minor renovation project, and they did not ask any more questions. Overwhelmed by the task, Virginia carefully placed her parents in sleeping bags, tightly wrapped them in plastic sheeting and tape to create a seal. She then moved her father's body to his office, positioning it in a corner behind his desk. Following the instructions, she mixed the cement and started to construct a makeshift sarcophagus around him, pouring cement over the body using expanding foam to fill in any gaps. Virginia chose to leave her mother's body in the room where the violent incident happened. She pushed the sleeping bag, along with the blood-stained blanket and other bedding, into the closet. Next, she coated everything with expanding foam. Then, she wrapped the closet in 20 rolls of plastic sheeting to seal it off. Finally, she built a wall using the leftover cinder blocks, closing off the corner where the closet with her mother's remains was located. On the same day, Virginia ordered 2 new credit cards from the bank in the names of her deceased parents. To relieve stress, she started making online purchases. She also sent several messages to her siblings, pretending to be her mother. In these messages, she claimed that she and her father were taking a trip to the seaside to relax and improve their health. Her older sisters, who seldom visited, did not question her and simply wished their parents a pleasant getaway. The global issues provided Virginia with an excuse for the next 6 months. She continued her daily activities as if nothing had changed. She did grocery shopping, spoke with her neighbors, collected her parents' pensions, and occasionally sent messages to relatives pretending to be her mother, hoping to keep them from worrying. She even scheduled appointments for her parents with their doctor, but cancelled them for various reasons. When people inquired about her parents and why they hadn't been around, she said they were staying with one of their many children. In the spring of 2020, the global issues leading to a worldwide lockdown. This situation worked in Virginia's favor because she no longer needed to explain why her parents weren't seen outside. With the lockdown, no visitors were coming to see them anytime soon. During this time, Virginia would sometimes call the family doctor, pretending to be her mother to seek advice. However, when the doctor recommended an in-person appointment or offered to visit, she would make up excuses to avoid it. Virginia sent messages to her sisters using Lois's phone, inquiring about their lives and the grandchildren, but she never invited them to visit. If any of them mentioned planning a trip, she would discourage them from coming. She even called the police while pretending to be her mother, complaining about noisy neighbors or disturbances. Over time, Virginia's behavior became more unusual. She began to impose herself on people she barely knew, offering friendship and creating bizarre stories about her life. Claiming she was about to get married and move away, She also harassed delivery drivers with numerous questions and frequently called the police for minor issues. In the small town, people saw her as the local eccentric, odd but harmless. For over 4 years, Virginia successfully hid the fact that her parents had died. Even her siblings never realized they were gone, believing the messages and greeting cards they received were truly from their parents when, in fact, it was Virginia sending them. The only person who suspected something was amiss was the family doctor. He grew worried when the McCullough, who had always taken their health seriously, stopped showing up for routine checkups and lab tests. Virginia picked up their prescriptions and assured the doctor that her parents were fine. Although he repeatedly scheduled appointments, Virginia canceled each time with various excuses. Several times, the doctor came to the McCullough's house to check on their health, but instead met Virginia, who said her parents were visiting relatives. In September 2023, the doctor called the police to express his concerns and requested an investigation. On September 13, 2023, the police visited the McCullough home and asked Virginia to bring her parents to the door. Virginia became visibly nervous, claimed that her parents had gone on vacation without their phones to avoid any disturbances. She assured them that her mom and dad would be back in a couple of weeks. However, the police became suspicious of their absence. On 15 September, Essex police executed a search warrant at McCullough's home, entered the house, and arrested Virginia McCullough. Virginia calmly stated that she had something to show them. She then led the officers to her father's office, pointing out a makeshift grave by the wall. Next, she took them to her mother's room and indicated a sealed closet. The bodies of the McCulloughs were found that same day. Due to advanced decomposition, it was challenging to determine the exact cause of death. However, Virginia, now facing charges, fully confessed and provided a detailed account of how she killed her parents. When asked for her motive, she cited old childhood grudges, claimed her parents were cruel, and described them as true monsters. When the tragic events at the McCullough household were revealed, the residents of the small town of Great Baddow were shocked. However, no one was more horrified than the older children of them, who had always believed their parents were alive and being cared for by their younger sister. The family's strained relationships allowed Virginia to hide her crime for many years. Investigators determined that her motives were not based on childhood trauma or mistreatment, as she had claimed, but rather driven by financial gain. For years, Virginia had been using her parents' pension while accumulating significant debts in their names. McCullough is facing double murder charges and appeared in court on September 18th, where she was taken into custody. The next day, she appeared via video link at Basildon Crown Court from Peterborough Prison, where Judge Samantha Lee scheduled a plea hearing for December 1st. An inquest into the deaths was opened by Essex coroner Michelle Brown on October 10th and was paused while the police investigation continues. During the hearing, it was revealed that Lois McCullough died from a stab wound to the chest. The cause of death for John McCullough is still under investigation. On December 1st, McCullough appeared at Chelmsford Crown Court via video link from prison, but did not enter a plea. Her defense requested more time to prepare reports from expert witnesses. Judge Christopher Morgan scheduled the next hearing for February 5, 2024, and set a deadline of February 1st for the defense to submit their report. At the hearing on July 4th, Virginia McCullough pleaded guilty to both counts of murder, and a sentencing hearing was set to begin on October 10th. The sentencing hearing occurred on October 11th, with Judge Johnson presiding. Virginia was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 36 years, which means she can be considered for release starting on October 3, 2059. McCullough's sentence was then sent to the Attorney General's office as part of the Sentencing Over Sentence program. However, in January 2025, the Attorney General's office reviewed the sentence and determined it did not meet the criteria for an appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Matthew Hoffman. Matthew Hoffman was born on November 1, 1980. Little is known about his childhood, but he was probably a quiet and somewhat withdrawn child who was loved by his parents. Although there may have been some strange traits in his behavior, they did not indicate that Matthew was a danger to others. He was very fond of plants, especially leaves. Matthew was a loner with no friends, and many people thought he was strange, even suspecting that he might have mental problems. He graduated from high school but did not pursue further education. After getting a job as a plumber's assistant in Colorado, Matthew, with no friends or acquaintances to help him, secretly stayed in a corner of one of his clients' apartments while they were away. When he learned that the landlord was returning, instead of cleaning up and leaving, he set fire to the apartment to hide his presence. Matthew was arrested and sentenced to 8 years in prison, but he only served 6 years and was released early for good behavior. In 2009, after returning to his hometown in Ohio, he bought a small house. He began dating a woman who had a young son from a previous relationship. Things went well for a while, as they all lived together until late 2010. Matthew's neighbors noticed a sudden change in his behavior. Previously, he enjoyed playing with the neighborhood kids and his girlfriend's son. However, he recently became irritable and angry. His girlfriend was fed up with this behavior, so she packed up and moved out of his house with her son. As a result, Matthew's situation worsened, and he lost his part-time job as a tree trimmer. The reason he was fired was that he was not doing a good job. Instead of working, he would sit in a tree for hours, staring into space. After losing his job, he began to live more frugally. A neighbor reported that he turned off the lights in his entire house to save on bills. He then built a platform in one of the trees on his property and spent hours sitting there, watching the neighborhood. Neighbors advised their children not to play outside while Matthew was in the tree, as they found his behavior very disturbing. He would sometimes catch and kill squirrels, cook them, and eat them, which one neighbor believed was because he had no money and could not afford food. A few weeks after breaking up with his girlfriend, she returned to collect the last of their belongings. They had a heated argument that escalated, and Matthew attempted to strangle her. Although she initially filed a lawsuit, she changed her mind and dropped the case a few days later. In November 2010, Matthew began behaving strangely and was found stealing various items. He soon developed a new hobby of breaking into homes in his small town. One house that caught his attention was located in the suburbs near a wooded area. He spent a lot of time in the trees watching the house. The occupants of the house included 32-year-old Tina Herman, her 2 children, 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, and 11-year-old Cody Maynard, and her boyfriend. The garage door was not properly locked, allowing Matthew easy access. Although there are neighboring houses, they are far enough away that no one can see or hear anything unusual at night. On November 9, 2010, Matthew was in the woods when he saw Tina's boyfriend leave for work at the distribution center at 3 a.m. It was still dark, and he was supposed to be gone for at least the day. Matthew then noticed 2 children leaving for school, followed by Tina, who left at 9 a.m. Thinking that she was leaving for work, Matthew decided to pack his things and break into Tina's house through the garage. He spent the next few hours exploring the rooms and slowly gathering items to put in bags. Usually, burglars are quick and take what they want before leaving. However, Matthew moved slowly around the house. When he heard a car approaching, he realized he might be spotted, so he quickly hid in the furthest room, which turned out to be Tina's bedroom. Tina Herman returned home after a walk with her friend Stephanie. They had the day off and had gone shopping together. When she got home, Tina took her bag into the bedroom to put away the things she had bought. In the meantime, Matthew hit her on the head with the handle of a large knife, causing her to flinch and scream. He then attacked her. Stephanie, Tina's friend, took the things she had bought out of the car to bring into the house. When she got inside, Matthew suddenly attacked her. She tried to escape, but he was faster and caught up with her. A dog lived in the house, and it started barking loudly during the chaos. Matthew eventually dealt with the dog. After the crime, instead of running away, Matthew dragged the two bodies into the bathroom. There, he started to process their bodies and place them in trash bags. After filling the bags, he carried them to Stephanie's car, which was parked nearby, and loaded them into the back of the car. After finishing, he returned to the house to clean up the scene. While inside, he heard Tina's children, Cody and Sarah, coming home from school, so he hid and waited for them to come in. Shortly after, Matthew attacked Cody. The boy tried to escape, but Matthew struck him in the back of the head, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Sarah ran down the hall to her room and tried to close the door to keep Matthew from entering, but he broke it open. Instead of killing Sarah, he found an electrical cord in her room and tied her up. He then covered her head with a pillowcase, picked her up, and carried her into the kitchen, where he laid her on the floor. Sarah was silent for an hour, listening to Matthew handling the body Cody's and mumbling to himself. He then picked Sarah up, carried her outside, and placed her in the back seat of Stephanie's car, along with the body bags. After driving about a mile to his parking spot in a secluded area, Matthew carried Sarah into his car and drove home. When he arrived, he locked her in the bathroom after gagging her. He then went back to Stephanie's parking lot to hide the garbage bags containing the body parts. He returned to his house, where he found himself exhausted and falling asleep. But before he fell asleep, he tied Sarah to him with a rope to prevent her from escaping. While Matthew slept, Sarah looked around the house and saw something strange. The floors and walls were covered with leaves, and there were bags filled with leaves scattered all over the house. When Matthew woke up, he decided to move Sarah to the basement, a small corner used for storage. He placed a blanket inside, put a pile of leaves on the ground, chained her up, and gagged her again. Matthew planned to go back to Tina's house to burn it, because he couldn't clean up the blood at the scene. He drove Stephanie's car to Tina's house and parked it in the garage. He then took Tina's pickup truck and went to his house to get a gas tank to burn it. However, the pickup broke down on the way. Not knowing what to do, Matthew abandoned the car in the university parking lot and walked home. The basement where Sarah was held was cold, dark, and damp. She was constantly freezing and had no choice but to lie down or sit because of the low ceilings. Matthew provided her with spoiled food and prevented her from using the bathroom. He wrapped a garbage bag around her waist to serve as a makeshift diaper and did not allow her to clean herself. The next day, Tina and Stephanie's co-workers noticed that they did not show up for work, raising concerns. Tina's supervisor went to her home and discovered that Tina's pickup truck was missing. Looking through the window, she saw an unusual mess inside the house. The employee eventually broke the window to enter the house, where she discovered a significant amount of blood and immediately called the police. When the police arrived and searched the house, they found no one there. The officers discovered that the children had not attended school that day. Inside the house, although no bodies were found, there was a significant amount of blood in almost every room. The investigation was aided by the discovery of empty trash bags in the house, which contained receipts for items purchased at a hardware store. Officers took this information to the store and requested video footage from a specific date and time. Although the man who made the purchase was not clearly visible in the footage, they were able to track him as he walked to his car, identifying it as a Toyota. At the same time, a search was underway for Tina's missing pickup truck, which was eventually found in the university parking lot. Inside the truck, police found empty gas cans. The police then gathered all the evidence and focused their search on the drivers of Toyotas. Ironically, Matthew's driver's license had a picture of him wearing the same shirt seen in the store footage, leading to his identification. The police deployed a special weapons and tactics team to Matthew's home. When they entered, Matthew, who was asleep on the couch and unaware of the situation, did not resist and was taken into custody without incident. After the arrest, the police conducted a search of Matthew's home and found Sarah in the basement. She was lying on a pile of leaves, tied up, but still alive. The police were shocked by the state of Matthew's home, which was littered with leaves, bags of leaves hanging from the walls, and the floor covered in leaves. In the living room, there was a pile of leaves, large enough to raise suspicions about what might be hidden underneath, especially given the disappearances of Stephanie, Tina, and Cody. Despite the chaos of the scene, the police found no evidence of a crime. They discovered strange and seemingly meaningless drawings on the doors and kitchen walls. The refrigerator contained the bodies of beavers and squirrels. When questioned, Matthew remained calm and quiet. He claimed the murders were the result of a botched burglary. Matthew intended to steal valuables and was surprised when Tina and Stephanie returned home. In a panic, he killed them. The police rejected the initial account, asserting that the crime was premeditated. Matthew found that the garage was open and that in the morning, everyone had left the house. Near the property, they found a sleeping bag and a burned area under a tree, which showed signs of having been climbed multiple times for a better view. They also found large bags of trash in the garage, along with a receipt indicating that Matthew had purchased them a week before the murders. Prosecutors pointed out that burglars typically do not linger in homes for hours. They take what they need and leave quickly. The police asked Matthew where he had hidden the victims. Initially, Matthew refused to reveal the location of the bodies, which led to a deal being struck. Facing the death penalty for his crimes, he was promised a reduced sentence if he disclosed the location of the bodies. Although he initially resisted, Matthew eventually wrote a confession and agreed to lead the police to the scene. He took them to a large tree in the reserve, where he had created a hollow at the top, accessible only by climbing equipment. Inside, the police discovered large plastic garbage bags filled with body parts. Matthew also requested that the police not damage the tree, as he believed it was sacred. However, the tree was cut down. On January 6, 2011, Matthew Hoffman pleaded guilty to the murders of Tina, Cody, and Stephanie, as well as to the abuse of their bodies. He also pleaded guilty to kidnapping and abusing Sarah for 4 days. As a result, Matthew Hoffman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah faced many challenges but remained strong and played a key role in the investigation, receiving praise from the police for her courage. She wanted the opportunity to speak at Matthew's sentencing to confront him directly. However, she was advised against doing so. After losing her mother and brother, she moved in with her father and stepmother. Sarah later wrote a book called Girl in the Leaves. When Sarah turned 16, her father and stepmother were charged with assaulting her. A protective order was issued, and Sarah moved in with another relative. Not much has been heard from her since then, but she is safe and well. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lois Heather Mack. Lois Heather Mack was born in 1995 to the famous musician and composer James Mack and his wife, Sheila Von Weiss, as their only child. She received all the attention from her parents, coming from a wealthy family. Heather enjoyed a comfortable lifestyle and had access to everything she wanted. The family was very close-knit, like many other happy families, and they often went on vacation together. However, in 2001, when Heather was only 6 years old, they went on a cruise with Royal Caribbean. During the trip, James injured his leg. Unfortunately, the doctor on board was not very specialized, and when James finally received adequate medical care, he was left partially paralyzed. He later filed a lawsuit against the company, which was only settled after more than 10 years in the last years of his life. James bravely fought colon cancer despite these hardships. Family vacations remained a cherished tradition for them. In 2006, James died at the age of 77 from a pulmonary embolism in his hotel room while on vacation in Athens after his death. His wife, Sheila, took his body to a Greek morgue and then continued their vacation in Santorini with their daughter, Heather. During this time, Heather, who was then 10 years old, began to develop negative feelings toward her mother. It is possible that the emotional turmoil stemmed from the death of her father just 5 days before his death. James's will named Heather as the sole heir to his multi-million-dollar fortune. However, in 2011, a lawsuit that James had filed against a cruise line for the incident that left him paralyzed was settled, resulting in a $5 million payout to Heather according to the will. Despite this, the judge awarded $500 of that money to Sheila over time. The relationship between mother and daughter became increasingly strained. Heather began skipping school and hanging out with a bad group of friends. She started stealing and rebelling against her mother over petty issues, even running away from home at night. While some might consider this behavior typical teenage rebellion, Heather's actions escalated. She stole money from her mother during arguments and spent large sums of money on a room in a luxury hotel. Heather's mother, Sheila, confided to friends that Heather frequently attacked her and became increasingly aggressive over the years. She was extremely defiant and cruel to Sheila. After each instance of stealing money or a credit card, the two would get into violent fights. During these arguments, Heather would bite and hit her mother, forcing Sheila to call the police each time. As her daughter's rebellious behavior escalated, Sheila felt increasingly unable to protect herself from the selfish and spoiled teenager. In her senior year, 15-year-old Heather fell in love with Tommy Schaefer, an unemployed young man who claimed to be a rapper. Tommy was raised by his mother alone after his father abandoned the family. According to Tommy's friends, he often lied or exaggerated his story to gain attention. Sheila saw him as a negative influence on her already troubled daughter and openly disapproved of their relationship. Despite Sheila's disapproval, Tommy and Heather bonded over their shared experiences of loss. Tommy had been abandoned by his father as a child, and Heather's father had died when she was 10. Together, they fantasized about spending Heather's inheritance, but Sheila was determined to prevent it. One day, after another argument, Heather and her boyfriend checked into a hotel. Sheila, realizing that her credit card was missing, reported the incident to the police. This further soured the relationship between Sheila and her daughter. In February 2011, during a heated argument, Heather pushed her mother into the bathroom, causing Sheila to fall and break her arm. After the incident, Heather refused to let her mother call for help and hung up the phone. These actions clearly showed that Heather did not love her mother. She often broke household items, and Sheila's friends knew how difficult it was to control Heather's behavior. In January 2012, after a heated argument, Heather ran away again, breaking plates and picture frames in their home. It was evident that Heather had been arguing with her mother frequently before leaving the house. Despite the constant verbal abuse and attacks, Sheila never chose to press charges against Heather. Even though friends and the police suggested that she do so, Sheila did not want her daughter to get into legal trouble and believed that, over time, Heather would mature and their relationship would gradually improve. Concerned about her daughter, Sheila decided to move from their high-rise apartment in Oak River to Chicago, hoping that a change of scenery would help Heather feel better. However, shortly after the move, Heather became pregnant with Tommy's child and dropped out of high school. Heather claimed that she had 2 abortions due to pressure from her mother in the last 3 years before the tragedy. Sheila suffered physical and mental abuse. Sheila then decided to take her daughter on a vacation to Bali, Indonesia. She wanted to spend time with her daughter to mend their strained relationship. After arriving in Bali, they checked into the luxurious St. Regis Hotel, choosing a beautiful room. They took happy photos together. Sadly, Sheila had no idea that a terrible plan was about to unfold. A few months earlier, Tommy had confided in his cousin, Robert Bibbs, about an unpleasant request from his girlfriend, Heather. She believed that the only way to escape her mother's control was to kill her. which she thought would also prevent an unwanted abortion. Tommy told Robert that after Sheila died, they would inherit millions of dollars from her. He also said that Heather was planning to hire a hitman to kill Sheila. Although Robert was shocked to hear this, he suggested that Tommy should commit the crime himself instead of hiring someone. The two cousins discussed their murder plan via Facebook and SMS. Robert and Tommy had been considering it for a long time, but made the mistake of communicating online, leaving them with a lot of evidence against themselves. Their final plan was for Heather to steal her mother's credit card again to book Tommy's flight and a hotel room where Sheila would stay before leaving for Bali. Sheila wrote a letter to her friend, expressing her concerns about the trip and her daughter's behavior, feeling unsafe. Sheila's friend tried to convince her not to go, emphasizing that the trip would hardly heal their broken relationship. On August 11, 2014, Sheila and Heather arrived on the island after midnight when Sheila checked into their resort. She was surprised to find 2 rooms booked under her name. She approached the receptionist, who showed her a copy of Tommy's passport. This caused Sheila to confront her daughter, leading to a heated argument in the hotel lobby. Heather insisted that Tommy had come to study, but Sheila was skeptical. She felt that a high school dropout would be unlikely to come to Bali for educational purposes. Tommy arrived at the resort just hours after Heather and her mother. Heather texted Tommy to say that Sheila was still angry, but had eventually fallen asleep. Heather quietly left the room and went to Tommy's room. They walked together down the hotel hallway. Heather then returned to her room, and they exchanged text messages discussing how to deal with Sheila between 4 and 8 a.m. Heather and Tommy exchanged numerous text messages in which it is believed that Heather had drugged her mother. In the messages, they mentioned that the drugs had not worked, causing Sheila to wake up. Tommy advised waiting at least 20 minutes to ensure Sheila would fall back asleep. The messages revealed that Heather was looking forward to the moment when she could kill her mother. Initially, Heather was supposed to carry out the murder, but she became frightened and asked Tommy for help. In the disturbing messages, Heather urged Tommy to stay strong. Tommy then contacted Robert, who was confused as to why Sheila had not died from the sleeping pills. Robert suggested drowning her, but Tommy informed him about the security cameras throughout the resort. Tommy and Heather decided that Tommy would use a heavy, blunt object to attack Sheila. Tommy showed Heather a picture of a glass fruit basket with a metal handle, and they agreed that they would use it as a weapon. The plan was for Tommy to sneak into the room and hit Sheila in the head, knocking her unconscious, so they could kill her together. After discussing the plan, Heather told her mother that she was going to get some water. Heather and Tommy went to Sheila's room, where they executed their plan. Tommy entered the room, closed the door, took a glass fruit basket, and smashed it over Sheila's head. He and Heather then attacked Sheila together until she stopped breathing. They stuffed her body into a suitcase, which they were later seen carrying on the hotel grounds at 10:20. Tommy texted Robert to confirm that Sheila was dead, stating that he felt no remorse or regret for his actions. Robert reassured him, saying that it was not his fault and that he should not feel ashamed because Sheila was a bad person. At 10:43, Heather and Tommy loaded their luggage and took it to the 6th floor. Security cameras recorded them carrying the suitcase along with other items from the room. They then called a taxi and loaded the bed sheets and suitcase into it. Just before leaving, they noticed that the suitcase was leaking blood. Heather and Tommy told the taxi driver that they needed to check out of the hotel and asked him to wait outside for them, but the couple quickly escaped through the fire exit after waiting for a while. The taxi driver noticed that Heather and Tommy had not returned, so he opened the trunk to retrieve the suitcase. At that moment, he noticed blood and immediately contacted security. Together, they took the suitcase to the police station. When they opened it, everyone inside was horrified to discover Sheila's body. She had suffered serious injuries, mainly to her face, including a broken nose and jaw. The cause of death was asphyxiation. As the blow had broken her nose and blocked her airway, it did not take long to find Heather and Tommy. They were arrested the next day at another hotel less than a mile from the scene of the murder. The The news reached Robert, who lived in the United States. When he saw the headlines about the arrest of Tommy and his girlfriend, he began texting friends in a panic, pretending to be shocked that Tommy had been jailed for murder. However, his earlier text messages with Tommy on the night of the murder showed that he was an accomplice. Initially, Heather and Tommy claimed that Sheila had been murdered by armed robbers, who then took the couple hostage. They said they had escaped, but were too scared to go to the police. However, after further questioning, Tommy changed his story, stating that he had killed Sheila in self-defense. He claimed that Sheila had reacted violently when they told her about the pregnancy. Heather supported this claim, saying that Sheila had been extremely violent during the confrontation. This contradicted police reports, which indicated that Heather had been aggressive in previous incidents with her mother. Heather also claimed that she was not present when Sheila was murdered. In Indonesia, the penalty for murder is death, a fate that Heather greatly dreaded. Her pregnancy helped her avoid the death penalty initially. The police were skeptical about her pregnancy, but after confirmation, she received some prison privileges. In April 2015, Lois Heather Mack was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Tommy Schaefer received 18 years. Heather's sentence was reduced because she gave birth while in custody, and judges believed her involvement in the murder was less serious than Tommy's. A year later, Robert Bibbs was charged with conspiracy against Sheila. After a trial in June 2017, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. During this time, Heather was able to use her cell phone and social media, where videos of her smoking and enjoying herself in prison went viral. Heather made a shocking confession video, which was later deleted, in which she claimed that her mother had killed her father, James Mack. She also accused Sheila of being violent towards her, but these allegations were denied by Heather's uncle and aunt. Furthermore, it was confirmed that there was no foul play in his death. Sheila never pressed criminal charges against her daughter. Despite the injuries she suffered over the years, Heather spent 2 years raising her daughter in prison before she was placed with a foster family. Heather only served 8 out of her 10 years in prison after being released. Heather did not want to return to Chicago due to safety concerns and planned to stay in Indonesia. However, she was extradited to the United States because neither she nor her daughter had a visa. Heather was arrested by U.S. authorities in November 2021 and held in federal prison. Her trial was scheduled for July 2023, but in June, she unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all charges on January 17, 2024. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Linda Curry. To avoid tragedy, sometimes it is enough just to walk away, to leave someone who behaves strangely and potentially dangerously, but in some heartbreaking cases, the victim and the killer remain fated to be together, leading to an irreversible outcome. Linda was once a charming woman with impeccable taste. She balanced her career during the week with dancing on weekends, which helped her relax and stay active even in her 40s. She looked stunning with her education. Linda achieved professional success, earned a good income, and maintained her perfect image. In 1989, she met Paul Curry at work. Paul quickly impressed Linda with his intelligence. Their relationship gradually developed into marriage, which took place on September 12, 1992, in Las Vegas. Compared to the accomplished Linda, Paul seemed rather ordinary, leaving many to wonder why such a successful woman was attracted to him. Although Linda spoke of him with admiration, their friends felt the couple lacked harmony. Paul was short and not particularly noticeable. Except for his intelligence, he lacked wealth and career success, which he often attributed to his age. Many found Linda's choice unusual. Her friends felt she was simply flattering herself by being with a younger man who was 13 years her junior. About a month after the wedding, Linda called her friend Mary Siebold to tell her that Paul wanted to buy her $1 million life insurance policy, and Paul is the beneficiary. Soon after, Linda began to experience strange and disturbing changes in her life. Previously full of life and energy, she was now tired all the time, and her appearance was affected. These symptoms caused Linda's relatives and Mary to begin to suspect that Paul might be the cause of Linda's declining health. Paul firmly denied these suspicions and even threatened to sue Mary for slander after she made some unfounded comments. However, this did not alleviate her suspicion that Paul might be behind Linda's difficulties. Mary continued to contact Linda and noticed that she was becoming increasingly weak, sensing that something was wrong. Mary advised Linda to leave Paul, believing that he could be a threat. However, Linda insisted that Paul was not the cause of her health problems. She often spoke highly of Paul, describing him as a loving and devoted husband who showed his affection through compliments and romantic gestures. Linda believed that her problems could stem from the stress of her job rather than her relationship. Despite seeing doctors regularly, Linda's health continued to worsen. The medications prescribed had no noticeable effect. Back in the 1960s, when Mary and Linda worked at a nuclear power plant, Linda was known for her impeccable fashion sense, and Mary was often surprised by how she maintained her figure despite enjoying food. During their regular meetings at work and outings, the two women formed a strong bond, sharing everything about their lives. Mary admired Linda's exceptional taste as she skillfully matched outfits, shoes, bags, and accessories. Mary and Linda shared a passion for fashion and beauty. They were also ambitious, career-focused individuals determined to succeed in their respective fields. Linda advanced quickly in her career. She started as a secretary and eventually became a manager with her own office. Linda had been married twice, but had ended both marriages. Afterward, she began a long-term relationship with an insurance agent named Bill Sandretto. They dated for over 8 years, but they never chose to get married. Primarily because Bill valued his independence, Linda and Bill went through multiple breakups during this time, but they always reconciled since the 1980s. Linda has become the head of the department and started earning a good income. Linda was enthusiastic about spending money, but she made an effort to avoid impulsive purchases. She managed her budget well and planned to make several major purchases. In addition to maintaining her fashionable appearance, she bought a car and a spacious house in San Clemente, California. This house was the dream home she had envisioned for many years. Finally, she was able to buy it for herself, marking a significant milestone that confirmed her success. This achievement filled Linda with pride. In early 1989, around the time of Linda's 45th birthday, her relationship with Bill came to an end. Paul, a consulting engineer hired at her company, frequently encountered her. He had a background in nuclear engineering and was a young professional with experience in power plant safety organization. However, he was seen as somewhat eccentric and quickly earned a reputation for being selfish and arrogant. His behavior was often deemed unacceptable, and he used his intelligence as an excuse for it. While Paul was indeed intellectually gifted and outperformed many of his colleagues based on his achievements, he also claimed to have won $26 in the lottery on his first try, which he attributed to careful calculation. Additionally, he belonged to an international community of high IQ individuals and often showcased his certificates. However, aside from that, he lacked any notable accomplishments. Paul was intelligent and charming, which impressed his boss, Linda, who quickly fell in love with him after 3 years of dating. They decided to marry. Fulfilling a long-held dream of Linda's, Linda often described their relationship as very loving, which seemed to justify her choice, even though she later confided to friends that there was no intimacy between them. As Paul showed little interest shortly after their marriage, Paul suggested they merge their finances. Linda contributed most of the income to their household, although they had plenty of money initially. Linda soon realized that her salary was not enough to cover their expenses. Despite her careful budgeting in the past, she found it increasingly difficult to save, and her funds were nearly depleted each month before her next paycheck. when she investigated the issue. She discovered that Paul had been using their joint finances to support 2 ex-wives and 3 children, whom Linda had not known about before their marriage. He dismissed this as a minor deception, and unfortunately, Linda believed him. This revelation surprised her friends, as she had always been financially responsible. As their marriage continued, Paul displayed increasingly suspicious behavior, leading to repeated concerning incidents, along with the story of the insurance contract. This raised red flags since he entered the marriage without any assets. While Linda owned a large mansion, multiple cars, and had invested in designer renovations, she still dressed elegantly and had a taste for expensive items, none of which Paul possessed. Paul must have known that his wife already had several life insurance policies in place, but he was not listed as a beneficiary on any of them. Her sister, ex-boyfriend, and other close relatives were. Instead, there seems to be no good reason for a new insurance policy. Many suspect that his motives were driven by a desire to gain financially in the event of her death, and many began to seriously fear that he would not just wait for such events, but might somehow expedite the process. Just 6 months into their marriage, Linda began to doubt her husband's true intentions. Around this time, her friend Frankie Thurber went through a divorce and found herself in a tough situation. In 1993, Linda offered Frankie a temporary place to stay in her mansion. Influenced by Frankie's experiences, Linda started to question whether her husband genuinely loved her, thinking he was trying to exploit their relationship. As a result, she asked Frankie not only to stay with her, but also to keep an eye on Paul and report any suspicious behavior. Even Frankie noticed that Paul had strong feelings for Linda, which showed in his actions. Although Paul wasn't wealthy and couldn't shower her with gifts, he expressed his love by taking care of her. He would cook delicious meals and pamper her with treats when she came home from work, followed by running a hot, foamy bath for her. This daily ritual became Linda's favorite. Observing this, and after listening to Frankie, even Mary eventually agreed that Paul seemed to be a loving husband, dedicated to making his wife happy. In June 1993, just before their first wedding anniversary, Linda's health began to decline. She experienced a mysterious illness, feeling persistently unwell without any typical symptoms of common ailments, like a cold. Instead, she suffered from ongoing stomach issues. Her condition worsened rapidly, and within a few days, she was hospitalized. By then, Linda was unable to get out of bed, shocking everyone around her, including her doctors, as she was once a healthy and vibrant 45-year-old woman. Despite extensive examinations, the cause of her illness remained undetermined. In early July 1993, Linda was admitted to a hospital in Samaritan due to gastrointestinal problems. She was given a private room and assigned a qualified nurse for her care. Paul, her husband, stayed by her side and did everything he could to support her. 2 days after the admission, the nurse connected Linda to an IV for hydration and briefly left to attend to another patient. When the nurse returned, she noticed something alarming. The saline bag appeared unusually dark. The fluid looked cloudy and slightly yellowish, suggesting that something might have been added to it. The nurse quickly disconnected Linda from the IV, took the bag for lab analysis, and reported her findings to the hospital management. On that day, Linda received a visit from her ex-boyfriend Bill, who was shocked by her frail appearance. Linda looked emaciated, as if she was struggling to survive. Within a week, she decided to go home, despite having difficulty walking, and was discharged from the hospital. However, her happiness was short-lived. Just 21 days later, she was readmitted due to a stroke. Linda nearly died, but was saved at the hospital. Subsequently, an analysis of her IV bag revealed a dangerously high dose of the painkiller lidocaine, which should not have been present for intravenous use. The medical center's management contacted the police, prompting an investigation that focused on one suspect, Paul, who was accused of attempting to poison his wife. Despite these alarming developments, Linda maintained that she loved Paul and had no plans to leave him. Did she realize that he might be the poisoner? It's possible that she simply pushed such thoughts away and didn't want to believe them. Meanwhile, her friends and family rallied against Paul, urging Linda to end the relationship for her safety. Nevertheless, she chose to stay with him. Linda eventually recovered from her mysterious illness, but the investigation into the poisoning stalled without any conclusions. Just 5 months later, in December 1993, Linda fell ill again with the same mysterious illness that doctors could not diagnose. Paul took her to a different hospital in Mission Viejo, where no one knew him, although he expressed distrust in the local specialists. The doctors there largely repeated the same diagnoses and conclusions as before. It appeared that Linda was being poisoned slowly. The medical staff also began to suspect her husband, who was always nearby. A nurse was assigned to monitor and care for Linda. She secretly communicated with Linda and warned her that her husband might have ulterior motives. A few days later, a similar incident occurred to one that had happened 5 months earlier. The nurse had briefly stepped out, leaving Paul alone with Linda. When the nurse returned, Paul was missing, and the IV drip bag looked different. It was later analyzed and found to be contaminated with unknown substances. The medical staff was already suspicious of Paul, believing he might be involved in an attempt to harm Linda to ensure her safety. They even placed a warning sign at the entrance of her room, with the content prohibiting Paul Curry from entering without an escort. The police were called back to Linda's room, where she explained that Paul had significant credit card debts, yet she insisted he was a wonderful, devoted, and loving husband. She maintained that he was very kind and could never harm her. It was possible that both medical institutions had misjudged the situation. When investigators interviewed Paul, he insisted that he had no idea what was happening to his wife and was simply waiting for her recovery. However, case records revealed a troubling discovery during searches of their mansion. In Paul's room, on his dresser, were all the life insurance policies taken out on his wife. This raised suspicions after Linda was discharged from the hospital. She spoke with Frankie, who confirmed that she had not placed the documents there, which meant Paul had done it. There was no one else involved. It was evident that Paul aimed to profit from her death. Despite this, Linda did not believe he was capable of such a terrible act. Nearly 6 months later, on June 9, 1994, Mary received an email from Paul, informing her that Linda was feeling worse than ever and that an ambulance had been called. He believed Linda was dying and urged Mary to come and support her. Later, around midnight, Paul called 911, claiming he had awakened to find his wife not breathing. In subsequent conversations with Linda's family and the police, he maintained that he sensed something was wrong, saw that Linda was barely breathing, and tried to perform artificial respiration, but she did not respond, prompting him to call for emergency help. By the time Linda arrived at the hospital, she had already died. Paul appeared to be a heartbroken widower, crying on the shoulders of Linda's family and friends, while they all quietly suspected him of murder. During the autopsy, the forensic expert found an unusual mark behind Linda's right ear, which they believed might be a sign of a syringe injection. A toxicology report later showed that Linda had a lethal amount of nicotine in her blood. This was particularly puzzling since Linda had never smoked. How could nicotine have entered her system? Consequently, her death was ruled a murder. But authorities found no evidence linking Paul to the crime. There were no syringes or needles at the scene, and the IV bags from previous cases did not have Paul's fingerprints. Meanwhile, Paul attempted to claim $1 million in life insurance from his deceased wife because he had previously successfully convinced Linda to purchase a new policy. Soon after Linda's death, it was discovered that she had handwritten a note, leaving half of her estate to her sister. This infuriated Paul, who sought legal advice to claim the entire inheritance, but he was unsuccessful. Everything had to be divided. In the end, Paul Curry collected $419 from Linda's 2 life insurance policies and her retirement plan. It also came to light that all of Paul's educational and professional credentials were forged. Even the supposed International Organization of Intellectuals was a scam. He hadn't even graduated from college. As a result, he was fired from his job. Now, these incidents were decided to be viewed in a new light. In 2002, the former state prosecutor retired, and a new one took over, showing immediate interest in Linda's case at the time of Linda's death. He was still in law school, but he had since become the district attorney and was eager to make a name for himself. He was particularly intrigued by the media used to store evidence from the mid-90s, especially the extensive analysis of microcassette analysis. All conversations with suspects and witnesses had been recorded, including an interview with Linda conducted shortly before her death while she was in the hospital in August 19, 1993, during the investigation. Authorities believed Linda was a victim of poisoning and sought to identify any potentially dangerous individuals in her life who might want to harm her. Mary quickly named one suspect, Paul Curry. He had the most significant motive. He stood to gain $1 million from insurance and ownership of his wife's property. The new prosecutor investigated the background of Paul and found that his entire life was based on deception. A poison expert specializing in substances like nicotine was consulted for the case. He determined that the nicotine level in the victim's blood was 4 to 5 times higher than a lethal dose, which could not have resulted from smoking alone, given the forensic expert's initial findings. It was concluded that Paul had administered a fatal injection discreetly behind Linda's ear. Death occurred approximately 20 to 30 minutes later, leaving no chance to save Linda. In addition to nicotine, significant amounts of a sedative and sleeping pill were detected in her blood. It appeared that he first sedated his wife to administer the lethal injection without raising suspicion. Adding the sleeping pill was easy for him since he often cooked for Linda and experimented with different sauces and spices. A neighbor testified that Paul went to the store for cigarettes that evening. However, it was clear that Linda could not have absorbed such a high dose of nicotine even if she had smoked 5 packs. The nicotine must have been injected. After losing his job, Paul relocated to Kansas, where he remarried and had a son. He initially worked as a used car salesman and did well, but later grew bored and switched to being a building inspector. During this time, he had never broken the law and seemed to be a good family man and a respected member of the community. On November 9, 2010, Sergeant Schull questioned Paul Curry under the pretense of questioning him as a potential witness in an unrelated case. In reality, they aimed to discuss Linda's death. Paul, believing they were out-of-state police officers unfamiliar with him and his late wife, began talking freely when asked about his past relationships, without requesting any identification. To the officer's surprise, he shared a story that contradicted his earlier statements. This led to the decision to arrest Paul Curry for revealing too much information. 16 years after his wife's death, Paul was finally held accountable. Unfortunately, justice did not hurry, and he did not appear in court until September 2014. During this time, he had spent all that time in jail. Paul faced charges of premeditated murder, which, according to state law, could result in life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The defense attorney employed a typical strategy of denial, arguing that the prosecution lacked direct evidence connecting Paul to Linda's murder. The defense claimed that Linda had given herself a nicotine enema, supposedly based on someone's suggestion of this unusual treatment for her stomach pain. Meanwhile, the prosecution stated that a sedative was found in her blood. Noting that there was no prescription for it and that it wasn't provided by the hospital, they alleged that Paul had given his wife the drug to sedate her before the murder. The prosecution also claimed that Paul was the only person in Linda's life with a serious motive and had been alone with her for at least 6 hours prior to her death, clearly having done something to her, as there was no one else who could have done it. After both sides presented their arguments, The jury went into deliberation, which lasted a day and a half. As a result, Paul Curry was found guilty of first-degree murder with the intent to profit, and he was sentenced to life in prison. Paul never admitted his guilt, so the exact circumstances surrounding Linda's death remain a mystery. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Robert Denton. Bristol is a city in Sullivan County, Tennessee, United States. The surrounding landscape is dominated by hills and forests. Among the trees are scattered homes, many of which sit on secluded plots of land, slightly removed from the roads below. At approximately 5:45 p.m. on August 29, 2015, a local homeowner, who worked the night shift and was asleep at the time, was awakened by the sound of gunfire. He recounted stepping out onto his porch, looking around, and then heading back inside. He initially thought everything was normal since there was a hunting site nearby. However, he found it strange that this time the gunfire was rapid and stopped abruptly. Another local resident was in his backyard when the shooting began. He said he heard 10 to 12 shots followed by shouting, with the entire incident lasting less than a minute. After the sound of gunfire stopped, he saw a man running down the driveway of a neighboring house, where the driveway met the main road. The trees cleared, making the scene visible. The man attempted to get into a car to escape, but his pursuer was close behind. A few more shots rang out before the car sped off down the road. That evening, 19-year-old Robert Denton called 911 after being attacked in his left arm. Despite his injury, he managed to drive to a neighbor's house to contact emergency services. Robert reported that his grandmother, mother, and stepfather had been attacked within 5 minutes. Police arrived and began searching for the shooter. Soon, the narrow rural road was filled with ambulances. A medical helicopter landed in a field near the scene to take the surviving victims to Johnson City Medical Center. Inside the home, officers found 2 women dead: Lena Rose, 57, and her daughter, Toshia Milhorn, 39. Toshia's husband, James Milhorn, was found unconscious on the porch with severe injuries. He was taken to hospital but later died. At the time of the shooting, 6 children were in the house. 5 were siblings, and the 6th was a visiting friend. A 7-year-old girl sustained non-life-threatening injuries, and none of the other children were harmed. Toshia and James had been married for about 4 years. Both also had children from previous marriages. James worked as a paramedic and firefighter for several agencies. He enjoyed restoring old cars and doing mechanical work in his free time. Toshia and James were remembered as loving, funny, and cherished by their family, friends. Those who knew them were left shocked and confused as to why anyone would want to harm them. The property where this tragedy occurred belonged to Toshia's parents, Curtis and Lena Rose, who had been married for 40 years. Toshia and her husband had moved in temporarily, intending to stay for just a few months while completing work on their trailer. At the crime scene, Curtis said that, after he found out relatives were attacked, Robert had already run out of the house and was fleeing down the driveway, believing his grandson was responsible for the murders. Curtis chased after Robert while running. Curtis called emergency services and caught up with Robert at the end of the driveway. He fired one attack that hit Robert's car window and another that struck Robert in the arm, despite being wounded. Robert managed to flee in his car when the police arrived. Curtis directed them toward Robert, but by then, Robert had already disappeared behind the house's back door. Near the laundry room leading to the kitchen, a rifle and a camouflage jacket were found on the ground, which was identified as the murder weapon 7 shell casings were recovered at the scene, matching the ammunition Robert had with him when emergency responders transported him to the hospital. Investigators determined that Robert had purchased this weapon at a military surplus store. A few weeks prior to the incident, a manhunt was launched for Robert. He then was arrested and charged with 6 counts, 3 for first-degree murder and 3 additional charges, 2 for aggravated assault and 1 for reckless endangerment. In February 2016, Robert pleaded not guilty after considering all factors, including his age at the time of the crime. The death penalty was removed. If he were to be convicted of the murders, Robert was held on $1 million bail. No charges were filed against Curtis, as law enforcement concluded that his account was consistent with the physical evidence. Curtis's version of events was accepted by law enforcement and became the foundation of their understanding of the massacre. Robert Denton, commonly known as Seth, was primarily raised by his grandparents. His mother, Toshia, reportedly struggled with mental health issues, including bipolar disorder. And Robert himself may have faced similar challenges. He briefly joined the military, but was later discharged and returned to live with his grandparents for a time. As a young adult, Robert sought independence and moved into a local apartment with a roommate. Shortly before the murders, Robert lost his job at a fast food restaurant. He had no criminal history or known violent tendencies, according to relatives and friends. However, Robert deeply resented his mother after interviewing those close to him. Authorities believe they were able to piece together the events leading up to the tragedy. Robert reportedly drove to his grandparents' house, parking at the bottom of a steep dirt driveway at approximately 1:45 p.m. He exited the car, put on a camouflage jacket, retrieved a semi-automatic rifle, and walked up the driveway past an above-ground pool before entering the house through the back door. Once inside, he swiftly attacks all 3 victims within seconds. Police were unable to determine the exact order in which the victims were attacked. After the attacks, Robert went outside, removed the camouflage jacket, and left it next to the weapon. He then crossed the property to his grandfather's trailer, where his grandfather was working, and knocked on the window. Robert is said to have called his grandfather out, apparently to urge him to call 911. Detectives believe Robert intentionally avoided involving children or his grandfather in the attack. They suspect his primary target was Toshia, while Lena and James were likely killed because they were present and witnesses to the murder. In late 2016, during jury selection at the Sullivan County Courthouse, Robert unexpectedly disrupted the proceedings. After several hours, the judge announced a brief recess when the trial resumed. Robert had already even threatened to dismiss his attorneys. Robert's defense team presented an alternative version of events. They accused his grandfather, Curtis Rose, of committing the murders and argued that investigators had made critical mistakes, particularly by ignoring evidence pointing to Curtis as the shooter rather than Robert. They pointed out that on the day of the incident, police allegedly asked no further questions about Curtis's involvement. Deputies from the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office who spoke with Curtis at the scene similarly avoided pressing him with follow-up questions. Besides, Robert's roommate testified for the prosecution to help establish a motive. He explained to the jury that Robert had expressed deep hatred for his mother over the years. Robert had frequently threatened to kill her, though family and friends who heard these threats dismissed them as immature outbursts rather than genuine intent. They never believed he would act on them. Another friend of Seth's also testified that a few months before the murders, he and Robert visited a military surplus store. At the store, Robert purchased 2 firearms, The store owner later confirmed the firearm purchase and verified the serial numbers. The defense argued that the strongest piece of evidence in the prosecution's case was the testimony of Curtis Rose. Who had previously admitted to attacking Robert, Curtis once again recounted the events of that day. He explained that Robert had knocked on the side of the trailer to get his attention. Curtis then glanced into the room and, in a rush, ran into the house. Once inside, Curtis saw his daughter slumped unnaturally in a dining chair, covered in blood. Realizing she was dead, he desperately searched the entire house for his wife, Lena. Eventually, Curtis returned to the living room after checking the bedroom. At this point, Curtis noticed his son-in-law, James, lying on the front porch and making noises that caught his attention. He then went into the kitchen, where he found his wife dead. Sitting between the table and the refrigerator, after discovering her body, Curtis returned to the bedroom to retrieve a gun. He then got into his van and drove down to the lower part of the driveway. He admitted that, at this time, he intended to kill Robert. Robert later testified. Providing his account of the events, he explained that, on that Saturday evening, he had called his aunt to ask where his mother was living because he wanted to visit his grandfather, with whom he shared a close bond. Robert and his grandfather occasionally went to the shooting range together, so he packed 2 weapons and a large amount of ammunition into his car. His aunt assured him that his mother wasn't living at his grandfather's house, but in a trailer elsewhere. This reassured Robert, as he wanted to avoid any interaction with his mother. Knowing it would lead to an argument, confident he wouldn't encounter Toshia, Robert drove to his grandfather's house. Robert parked at the end of the driveway and carried his weapon. Intending to show it to his grandfather, they briefly discussed ammunition. And during their conversation, Robert handed the weapon to his grandfather. According to Robert, his grandfather then walked into the house with the weapon, and Robert followed. Expecting that they might check for compatible ammunition, Robert recounted that when he entered the house behind his grandfather, the latter immediately began to attack with the weapon. Robert claimed that, from his position behind Curtis, he saw his mother sitting at the table and witnessed his grandfather kill her. His grandfather suddenly snapped, prompting him to panic and flee the house. Fearing for his life, however, the defense provided no clear motive as to why Curtis would have committed the murders. The trial lasted 8 days and included nearly 200 pieces of evidence. Both Curtis's shoes and Robert's shoes were covered in blood. The testimonies of Curtis and Robert contradicted each other, however. The jury confirmed that there was a lie in the testimony, according to Robert's friend and the arms dealer. The rifle used in the murder belonged to Robert. In fact, he had brought it to the Curtis house, and Robert still had bullets when fled. The jury deliberated for 2 full days on the first day. The jurors grew so tired after 5 hours of reviewing evidence that they requested to pause for the night, when they resumed the next day. They unanimously agreed on all 6 charges in the indictment. The jury found Robert Denton guilty of first-degree murder. The jury recommended a life sentence for Robert. With no possibility of parole for at least 51 years, Robert continues to claim his innocence. He is currently serving his sentence at the Turney Center Industrial Complex in Tennessee, the Millhorn. Children are still being cared for by family members.
On April 16, 2024, just after 11 a.m., in a quiet apartment building in Iztacalco, Mexico City, the sun shone brightly and the streets were peaceful. Inside one of the apartments, a teenage girl was finishing her schoolwork while her mother ran a quick errand. Everything seemed normal, but someone was watching someone familiar with the apartment's layout and who had been there before. What happened in the following minutes would profoundly impact the community and reveal a hidden nightmare that had persisted for over a decade. This marked the beginning of a shocking revelation. In April 2024, 17-year-old Maria Jose Castillo Calles was living a peaceful life in Mexico City with her mother, Cassandra Calles. They had recently settled into a modest apartment in the Iztacalco borough. Maria was a kind, compassionate girl with a love for motorcycles and animals, especially her cherished dogs. Neighbors described her as polite, calm, and dedicated to her studies. She rarely went out, spending most of her time focused on schoolwork and preparing for her university entrance exams. Her dream was to study international business, build a successful career, and one day provide financial support for her mother. However, someone had been watching her. Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra Calles, were unaware that a man had been entering their apartment multiple times. It's unclear whether he used a hidden key or entered through a window, but he clearly knew their daily routine well. On the morning of April 16th, Cassandra left to run errands, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Security footage later released to the media showed Cassandra walking down the street with the man following closely behind, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, Maria was in her bedroom doing homework when her stalker walked in. She screamed for help, alerting the neighbors, but he quickly overpowered her and brutally stabbed her multiple times. Cassandra sensed something was wrong and returned home early, only to find a shocking scene: her daughter lying lifeless on the floor, with an attacker still present, assaulting her. Before Cassandra could react, the man lunged at her, stabbing her multiple times. Despite her injuries, she was able to call for help. Neighbors who heard the earlier screams quickly came to assist. Some confronted the attacker, while others helped Cassandra and called emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, rescuing the suspect from an angry mob of residents. Paramedics confirmed that Maria was dead, and Cassandra was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The suspect is Miguel Cortez Miranda, a 39-year-old man who had lived in the same building for over 10 years. On the surface, Miguel appeared to lead a normal life. He was born in Mexico City on October 25, 1984, as the youngest child of a homemaker and a university professor in microbiology. From a young age, Miguel showed both exceptional intelligence and troubling behavior, including experimenting with chemicals on cars, household items, and later, animals. In school, he studied to be a bacteriological chemist and parasitologist, and later graduated from the National School of Biological Sciences and the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. By 2008, he secured a job in a laboratory where he analyzed food and water. He graduated with honors and worked for reputable companies, earning a solid reputation as a professional by his mid-20s. However, hidden beneath his polished appearance was a darker side. Miguel posted on social media images of cemeteries, skulls, preserved animals. He shared unsettling jokes and wrote poetry about death and spiritual pain. In 2014, he transformed into an avant-garde artist, leaving his previous career behind. He acted in independent theater, frequently taking on roles of the deceased, and became active in vegan and animal rights movements. While neighbors considered him eccentric yet harmless, they were mistaken. Investigators made a troubling discovery while looking into Maria Jose's case. She was not the only victim of Miguel. Authorities conducted searches on 3 properties related to him. In his apartment, they found disturbing evidence: surgical tools, saws, human bones, blood-stained items, and a container holding the remains of at least 20 different people. Along with these remains were IDs and personal belongings, predominantly belonging to women. Even more unsettling were 3 handwritten notebooks, which Miguel had used to detail his crimes. These entries dated back to 2012, indicating a pattern of horror that lasted over a decade. Many of the potential victims were believed to be missing students or escorts associated with Miguel. Over the years, forensic teams began the slow task of identifying the remains through genetic testing. The revelations stunned the nation. Miguel, once seen as an educated, quiet man with a curious mind, was now at the center of one of the most grotesque crime cases in modern Mexico. Leaked pages from his journals hinted at past trauma, including alleged abuse by his father. While some reports claimed his mother and sister ignored his suffering, his sister publicly denied this, though she did acknowledge that both siblings had endured a violent upbringing. In the days following the arrest of Miguel, silence from authorities gave way to a wave of speculation. The media quickly dubbed him the monster of Iztacalco and Dahmer Mexican, comparing his crimes to those of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer who murdered 17 young men and kept their remains in his apartment for years without detection. Local officials referred to him simply as the feminicidal killer. As journalists began to investigate further, unsettling details about Miguel's online presence surfaced on social media. He had long been posting disturbing poetry, some of which, in hindsight, appeared to describe his crimes in abstract artistic language. Hidden behind a facade of intellectualism and eccentricity, Miguel had managed to avoid suspicion for over a decade. The most disturbing revelation came when a crime reporter leaked video footage of his first court appearance. In it, Miguel appeared calm, even smiling, as he listened to the charges. During the hearing, he confessed in graphic detail to the murder of Maria Jose. He explained that on the day of the attack, he believed the apartment was empty. It was not his first time breaking in. When Maria Jose unexpectedly spotted him, she screamed for help. He claimed he asked her to stop, and when she didn't, something in him snapped. He described entering a state of frenzy and attacking her violently. He also admitted that after Cassandra returned home, he intended to kill her too. Following his confession, the court charged Miguel with the gender-based murder of Maria Jose and attempted murder for the brutal attack on Cassandra. He was ordered to remain in prison as the investigation expanded outside the courtroom. Grief turned to outrage. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex to hold a memorial mass and built an altar in Maria Jose's honor. The call for justice grew louder. Families of other missing women came forward, demanding that authorities identify the remains found in Miguel's home. Soon, long-forgotten names and heartbreaking stories resurfaced. For many, it had been years since they last saw their daughters, sisters, or friends. On May 3, 2024, the Attorney General of Mexico City confirmed what many feared. DNA results had identified several of the victims. Among them were Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, 18, Karen Ornelas Balzataz, 21, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 32, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra, 32, Claudia Andrea A, 36, Norma Elena O, 41, Cynthia Vanessa E, 39, and Laura V, 33. Each of these women had disappeared at different times over the last 10 years. Their confirmed deaths revealed the massive scope of Miguel's atrocities and raised a terrifying question. How had this predator gone unnoticed for so long? As the media swarmed the story, one victim's identity, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, was verified by the discovery of her skull. But this was far from the last revelation. Authorities began investigating whether Miguel, using his background in chemistry, had found ways to preserve more bodies. Experts feared that many more victims could be hidden in storage or elsewhere, their identities still unknown. With the identification of known victims, the timeline of Miguel's murders started to take shape. Investigators think that his first verified murder took place in 2012. The victim was Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, an intelligent and athletic 18-year-old who was born in Mexico City on December 26, 1993. Amirani was the third of 4 children in a diligent family. In 2012, she had just finished her studies in business administration and was getting ready to go to university to study engineering. On August 1st of that year, she left home to attend a preparatory course and intended to pick up her graduation photos. She never came back. Her disappearance was reported the following day, but instead of being taken seriously, the authorities dismissed the case. Officers joked that she likely ran off with a boyfriend. From the moment her family reported her missing, crucial mistakes were made. By the time investigators requested it, security footage from nearby cameras had already been erased. Phone records, which could have helped track her last known movements, were not obtained because telecommunications companies did not cooperate. Additionally, the official missing person bulletin had inaccuracies, particularly regarding her age, which caused confusion and slowed down the search efforts. Authorities discovered that Amerini had been in contact with Miguel, who was with her on the day she went missing to collect graduation photos. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his reputation as a respected young professional, which seemed to protect him unfairly. While the Amerini's family endured their suffering, Miguel continued to lead a double life. In December 2012, just a few months later, Miguel targeted his next victim, 21-year-old Karen Ornelas Baltazar, a clinical lab technician. At that time, Karen was studying pharmaceutical chemistry at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Miguel, who was her supervisor at the laboratory, showed an inappropriate interest in her. Karen brushed off his advances, but her boyfriend felt that something was wrong with Miguel, a concern that would sadly turn out to be true. On December 1, 2012, Miguel planned a surprise birthday party for Karen at his apartment. Friends and co-workers attended the celebration. Not knowing about the plans Miguel had, Karen spent the evening with a few colleagues and decided to go home early the next morning. Miguel offered to accompany her to the metro station but returned alone later that day and did not explain where she had gone. The following day, Karen was reported missing. Suspicion quickly turned to Miguel, the last person known to have seen Karen alive. Days later, her body was discovered. The autopsy determined that she died from bronchoaspiration caused by alcohol intoxication, but her family did not believe this explanation. Karen's body had multiple bruises, which the police attributed to a fall. Her family was left with lingering questions and a growing sense that something much more troubling had occurred. Miguel attended Karen's funeral, where he acted politely and expressed his condolences to her grieving family. No one suspected that the killer was there among them. He managed to keep up his pretense long enough to choose his third victim, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera. Frida was a 32-year-old from a large family struggling financially. She moved to Mexico City to pursue her dream of studying industrial administration at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Fortunately, she became neighbors with Miguel. Miguel quickly gained Frida's trust, and their friends noticed a strong bond between them, leading some to speculate about a potential romance. However, Frida viewed Miguel as a mentor who was helping her navigate the challenges of city life and academic pressures. In early 2013, Miguel's behavior changed dramatically. He quit his job at the lab, stopped posting emotional updates on social media, and began focusing on new interests. He adopted a vegan lifestyle, became involved in animal rights activism, and distanced himself from his former friends. By February 2014, after returning from a solitary trip in the mountains, Miguel appeared revitalized and focused, though investigators would later uncover that he was preparing for something much darker. In December 2014, Frida disappeared. Her last known online activity was on December 7th. Due to her family's remote location in Moros, with limited communication, they didn't realize she was missing until February 2015. Frida's sister and their mother went to Mexico City to report her missing. Unfortunately, the authorities were dismissive, suggesting that Frida might have run away with a boyfriend. With no help from the police, her family attempted to search for her on their own, but after several months without any progress and running out of resources, they had to go back home. Miguel, who was the main suspect, pretended to offer support and sympathy while remaining under suspicion. The police did nothing with the only significant clue, phone records showing that Miguel had called Frida's phone number. As time went on, each visit from Frida's family to the police resulted in silence and empty promises, while Miguel continued his life without any interruptions. In September 2018, he began working at a quality control lab, where he met his fourth known victim, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra. Viviana was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer and a mother to a 9-year-old girl. She admired Miguel's professionalism, and they developed a connection. However, less than 3 months later, she disappeared. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana said goodbye to a co-worker after finishing her shift and headed to the metro. But she never returned home. Her disappearance prompted serious police investigations, and several of her co-workers, including Miguel, were questioned. Yet, like in earlier cases, he managed to avoid suspicion. Despite his connection to multiple missing women, he remained undetected. This raised a troubling question. Was it due to police incompetence, or had Miguel become an expert at deception? In 2019, a year later, Miguel switched jobs once more and started working at a well-known private hospital's lab. It was there that he reconnected with Claudia Andrea A., a former colleague who would later become his 5th victim. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and Claudia frequently shared their happy moments on social media, smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrific fate that lay ahead for her. On December 27, 2019, Claudia disappeared on her 36th birthday after making plans for a celebration with Miguel. Concerned when they hadn't heard from her, her brother and their mother went to her apartment. They found the door unlocked, towels stuffed under the frame, and discovered Claudia's decomposing body in her bed. The initial forensic report indicated she died from respiratory failure, but her family had doubts. The messy state of the apartment, the makeshift measures to cover up the smell, and Claudia's relationship with Miguel raised significant questions. Despite their concerns, the police decided not to investigate further and closed the case. On December 31st, Claudia was buried, but shortly after, suspicious transactions appeared on her bank account between January 1st and 2nd, 2020. Additionally, several of her personal items, including her ID and phone, went missing. This situation led her family to request that the investigation be reopened. Investigators stated they were reviewing security footage, but interest in the case quickly diminished. Meanwhile, Miguel returned to living quietly in his apartment. The indifference of the system became his strongest ally. In April 2024, a violent attack on Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra, led to a significant breakthrough. The arrest of Miguel revealed his troubling history, prompting investigators to piece together the evidence against him. This development rekindled hope for the families of his earlier victims, who had felt silenced for too long. Cassandra, the sole survivor of Miguel's assaults, slowly healed from her injuries. In interviews with the local media, she recounted her terrifying experience from that unforgettable April morning. By early 2025, authorities projected that Miguel's victim count could be at least 20. However, even with the shocking evidence and public outcry, updates from officials have been rare. The investigation is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be announced. The journey toward justice is long and uncertain. For now, families hold on to hope that the man who has escaped justice for over a decade will finally be held accountable. Their voices, once drowned out by bureaucracy and apathy, are now growing stronger. The case of Miguel Angel Cortez is no longer just about a serial predator. It highlights the failures of a system that has ignored these issues for too long. For the victims, this narrative is not just about their deaths, but about ensuring they are never forgotten. In an unexpected turn of events, on the morning of April 13, 2025, Miguel Cortez Miranda was found on the floor of his cell at Reclusorio Oriente and was immediately taken to Iztapa General Hospital, where he died. His cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest due to a prescription drug overdose, aggravated by head trauma when he fell from his bunk bed. Due to his sudden death, Mexican authorities opened an investigation to determine if there was anything suspicious surrounding the incident. At the time of his death, Miguel was scheduled to appear in court and was under investigation for making phone calls to the victim's relatives. Due to his death, investigations into his case were discontinued. The sudden death of Miguel Cortez Miranda may have closed a dark chapter, but it left countless questions unanswered and wounds unhealed. For the families of Maria Jose, Amairani, Karen, Frida, Viviana, Claudia, and others. The loss remains a haunting reminder of a predator who thrived in the shadows of systemic neglect, while their voices now echo louder, demanding accountability and reform. The fight for justice continues, not only to honor the memory of those taken, but to ensure such horrors are never overlooked again. This case, etched in Mexico's collective consciousness, stands as both a tragedy and a call to action, urging society to confront the failures that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight for far too long. It was a calm night in the semi-rural Melbourne suburb of Mornington. A small family was getting ready for bed. A pregnant mother was sleeping upstairs, her little girl was tucked in her bed, and the father was quietly moving around the house. Everything seemed normal, no loud arguments, no signs of trouble. By the next morning, things were seriously wrong. What really took place that night? John Miles Sharp was born on February 28, 1967, in the small coastal town of Mornington, Victoria. He was the middle child in a large family with 6 siblings. Unlike his siblings, John was quite different. He was withdrawn, quiet, and struggled with extreme shyness. From a young age, he found social situations overwhelming, which often left him feeling drained. While his brothers and sisters easily made friends and played with others, John stayed on the sidelines, dealing with anxiety and feeling out of place. His closest relationships were with his parents, as he found the outside world to be unfriendly and unwelcoming. School was not a refuge for him. He had a few classmates he talked to, but no genuine friendships and no one to share his thoughts with. Nonetheless, he persevered and graduated. By the 1990s, he found a job at the Commonwealth Bank, and that's when everything started to change. Anna Kemp entered John's life like a ray of sunshine. She was cheerful, outgoing, and full of energy, a confident, intelligent woman from New Zealand. At 27, John was younger than Anna, who was 31. Despite their differences, they were drawn to each other. Anna's warmth complemented John's quiet steadiness. Working together every day allowed them to grow closer, and soon they fell in love. After a year of dating, they officially became a couple and married in October 1994. Although Anna was far from her family in New Zealand, she maintained a strong connection with them, especially her mother. They often spoke on the phone, sharing love, encouragement, and updates about her new life in Australia. Anna came from a deeply religious background, and her faith was a strong foundation for her life. For her, marriage was not just a legal contract, but a sacred commitment. After the ceremony, once they settled in and the honeymoon phase passed, Anna began to notice something she hadn't recognized before. John had changed. He became quieter, colder, and emotionally distant. She later shared with friends and family that it felt like something vital had been turned off. The relationship suddenly felt empty, lacking passion. Although John would have outbursts of anger, Anna remained committed because she believed in their vows, in making an effort, and in the importance of giving it time. In August 2002, Anna experienced immense joy with the birth of her daughter, Gracie. Becoming a mother was one of the happiest moments of her life. However, shortly after Gracie was born, doctors diagnosed her with hip dysplasia, which meant she needed to wear a corrective orthopedic brace for the first 3 months. This made for a difficult start. Anna spent sleepless nights caring for Gracie and adjusting to her new role as a mother. In contrast, John struggled to connect with their daughter. From the beginning, he was distant, showing no warmth or affection. Multiple sources indicated that he felt resentment towards Gracie, even going so far as to call her a harsh name that revealed a troubling lack of empathy. Her cries frustrated him, and her needs interrupted his life. The marriage was falling apart. Anna shared with her family that there was constant tension in the house. Communication was minimal, and even minor decisions turned into arguments. She wondered if their difficulties were due to lack of sleep or if they were simply going through a tough time. Anna hoped that as Gracie got older, things would improve. Unfortunately, the situation only grew more unstable. Shortly after Gracie was born, John made a significant choice. He quit his job at the bank. He began working from home as a conveyancer, handling the legal paperwork for real estate transactions. This change provided him with flexibility and independence. He operated his business from a small office in their home, becoming even more isolated than before as he was already a withdrawn person. As time passed, Anna noticed that John's choice wasn't driven by ambition, but rather by a desire to escape. He was struggling with the pressures of his job, the extended hours, relentless demands, and interactions with others. John found this environment overwhelming, as he was not naturally social. Dealing with clients, leading a team, and navigating a busy workplace exhausted him more than he admitted. Now, he was trying to avoid it all. In September 2003, a significant change occurred for the family. John and Anna purchased a new house. This house was bigger and located just a few streets from John's childhood home, where his parents still resided. While it seemed like the start of a new chapter, the atmosphere inside felt different. Instead of laughter, the walls of their new home were filled with silence. The tension between John and Anna was not only present, it was intensifying. In November, Anna discovered she was pregnant again, this time with a boy. She was excited and shared the news with a close friend. Their little girl, Gracie, would soon have a sibling. However, John's reaction crushed that dream. He didn't smile, hug her, or show any joy. Instead, he questioned whether the baby was really his. Anna later shared with her loved ones that John harbored resentment. Instead of celebrating the news of the second pregnancy, he reacted with cold irritation. He wasn't simply indifferent, he was deeply troubled. To him, the pregnancy felt like an added burden rather than a blessing. He began to struggle emotionally, finding it hard to sleep and hardly speaking to anyone. He withdrew into himself, becoming increasingly silent and irritable. Eventually, he consulted a doctor and was diagnosed with insomnia. Although he was given sleeping pills, they were ineffective. Night after night, he lay awake in darkness, consumed by thoughts that told him everything was going wrong, that life was overwhelming, that no one understood him, and that it would be easier if he didn't have to keep up the facade of being a supportive husband, father, and man who had everything under control. On March 23, 2004, Anna was in her second trimester of pregnancy. That day, the whole family, John, Anna, and Gracie, went to a birthday party for their nephew. To everyone else, they seemed like an ideal family. Anna had already picked out a name for the baby, Francis. Even a close friend who had been staying with them that week noticed nothing out of the ordinary. They looked like any typical family. The next morning, Anna dropped Gracie off at nursery school as usual. Later that day, she called a friend, and they arranged to meet in a few days. The day after that, she reached out to her private health insurer to add her unborn child to her policy. 2 days later, on March 23rd, an argument occurred. The specifics of the conversation are unclear, but it was serious. That night, after the argument, they went to bed around 9 to 10 p.m. Anna was likely asleep when John got up, walked downstairs to the garage, and retrieved a spear gun. He then returned to the bedroom and shot his pregnant wife in the left temple. When she did not die immediately, he shot her again. Afterward, he covered her bloodied body with a blanket and went downstairs to sleep on the couch. The entire incident took only a few minutes. The next morning, John got up, dressed Gracie, and took her to nursery as if everything was normal. He started to fabricate a story, claiming that Anna had left him for another man and that she intended to come back in a few days to pick up Gracie. However, Anna's family didn't believe him. They tried to reach her through calls and messages, but received no response. This silence was incredibly frustrating for her mother, as Anna had always been in touch, even when she traveled abroad. Now, there was only silence. Worried and increasingly frantic, Anna's mother reached out to her local parish priest in New Zealand, who had known the family for many years. She explained that she hadn't heard from Anna since Monday, despite sending messages that had gone unread. The priest noticed her distress and recognized that Anna's silence meant something was wrong. He decided to take action and contacted the police in New Zealand. As a parish priest and a respected member of the community, his worries were treated with utmost seriousness. Soon, investigators would start uncovering the truth behind John's elaborate deception, revealing a situation much more troubling than anyone could have expected. Initially, authorities did not regard the situation as a criminal case. They believed that Anna might just need some time alone, possibly to avoid difficult conversations or feelings of embarrassment. However, as days passed, her silence became increasingly concerning. The New Zealand police decided to take the situation more seriously and transferred the case to Australian officials. Officers in Victoria were then asked to conduct a welfare check at Anna's home in Mornington. Anna had a meeting planned with a close friend on March 26th, with the time and location already confirmed. However, before the meeting could take place, an unusual event unfolded. The friend received a phone call from John, who informed her that Anna would not be attending. He shared the same story he had told others, that Anna had left him and Gracie for another man. The friend was shocked. She had known Anna for years, and they had shared everything, so this news was hard to believe. Nevertheless, she felt a strong instinct to not ignore what she had heard. As concerns about him grew, John was busy hiding his actions. He had purchased the spear gun since early 2003, claiming he needed it for fishing. Although he never used it, he paid in cash, leaving no evidence of the purchase. On the night he killed Anna, he slept on the sofa. The next morning, he prepared Gracie and took her to nursery just like any other day. When he came back home, Anna's body was still upstairs. He attempted to remove the spears from her skull, but only succeeded in unscrewing the metal tips. The blades remained embedded. He then dragged her body to the backyard and buried it in a shallow grave. Life continued as usual, at least outwardly. By Saturday, 4 days after Anna's death, John was still acting as though everything was normal. He followed his usual schedule, dropping Gracie off at nursery, picking her up, making her dinner, and putting her to bed. However, that evening, once she was asleep, a darker side of him emerged. He started drinking. John was preparing to commit another terrible act. This time, it was against his own daughter. When he felt ready, he took a spear gun from the garage and shot his daughter in the head, penetrating her skull. As the child was injured and screaming, John retrieved the 2 spear shafts he had earlier removed from his wife's head and returned to the bedroom. He shot both spears into Gracie's head, but she was still alive, so he removed 1 spear and shot again, finally killing her. The next morning, John returned to the bedroom and pulled the 2 spears out of her head. He then wrapped her body in a garbage bag and a tarpaulin and dumped her body at the Mornington Waste Transfer Station. He also disposed of the spear gun, the spears, some of Gracie's clothes, and toys. In the days that followed, John made an effort to maintain his deception. He accessed Anna's email account and began sending messages to her friends and family, pretending to be her. He wrote that she was happy, in love, and pregnant again with her new partner. If anyone questioned his story, John would say she had her phone. Something felt off to those who knew Anna well. The emails she sent were unusual. Their tone was inappropriate, cold, and mechanical, lacking the warmth, humor, and affection that defined her. Although the words resembled her writing style, the essence was missing. John might have thought that being far away in New Zealand would shield him and allow him to control the situation. Then, unexpectedly, the doorbell rang. Police officers from Victoria stood at his door. John appeared surprised, but remained composed. He recited a well-prepared account of events. He said Anna had left on March 23rd, returned a week later to pick up Gracie, and that he had only seen her a few times since. He claimed they had discussed separation, the baby, and their futures. He insisted that Anna no longer loved him and that the baby wasn't his. He tried to project an image of a hurt man, betrayed and abandoned. He wanted others to see him as the victim, but deep down, he sensed the instability beneath him. That same day, after the police had visited, John went to a hardware store. He bought duct tape, 2 tarpaulins, and a chainsaw. Once home, he dug up Anna's body from the shallow grave in the backyard and dismembered her. He wrapped the body parts in tarpaulin and duct tape, then drove them to the dump to dispose of them. He replaced the blood-stained mattress and got rid of Gracie's cot to keep up the facade that Anna was still alive. He continued to access her email and sent messages from her account. He even used her bank card to buy flowers for her mother, pretending they were from Anna, a disturbing act to maintain the illusion. The truth was starting to surface. A police investigation was ongoing, and the media had picked up on the story. In a shocking moment that captured the nation's attention, John appeared on live television. He pleaded for Anna to return home, asking her to call or give any indication that she and Gracie were safe. He expressed his love for them, stating how much he missed them and that he still cared. John wasn't genuinely grieving. He was pretending. At that moment, he had already given a written statement to the police, claiming he had nothing to do with Anna and Gracie's disappearance. He repeated his story to everyone. Anna had left, but the investigators didn't believe him. Although they lacked sufficient evidence to arrest him, they decided to keep him under surveillance. They followed him to Chelsea Beach, the place where John had said Anna had gone. There, he has left something in the bushes. After he left, the officers moved in to search the area. What they discovered changed everything. Hidden in the bushes were Anna's mobile phone and bank card. John had been using her items to maintain his lie. He returned to that spot regularly to create a false trail and support his deception. But now he had been caught. John Sharp was arrested and charged with the murders of his wife, Anna, and their daughter, Gracie. Initially, he maintained his innocence, repeatedly denying any involvement. However, as the investigation intensified and the questioning became more pressing, John eventually confessed to killing both Anna, who was 41, and Gracie, who was just 20 months old. After his confession, police began a large-scale search of the local landfill based on his information. They sifted through every ton of waste by hand for 3 weeks. On July 6, 2004, they discovered the bodies. The grim reality was now clear. When asked about his actions, John didn't show any regret. Instead, he shifted the blame to Anna. He told the police that she was moody, controlling, and unhappy. John claimed that Anna prevented him from seeing his family as often as he wished and insisted that their marriage was already over. He thought he could raise Gracie alone, but later confessed he was scared of being a single father and felt overwhelmed by her crying. He also admitted that he had never really bonded with her. During the trial, a forensic psychiatrist described John as socially awkward and deeply withdrawn, unable to face his own problems. Experts believed he saw his home life as a prison from which he couldn't escape. He lacked the skills to resolve conflicts, communicate effectively, or seek help. John told doctors that during the murders, he felt like a different person, but tests showed no signs of psychosis. He was aware of his actions. The psychiatrist found that John was experiencing moderate depression, which affected his perception of reality but didn't completely impair his judgment. During the sentencing, the judge delivered a strong condemnation, calling the murders premeditated and cruel. He pointed out that John had killed his wife out of resentment and referred to Gracie as a defenseless child who depended on him both legally and morally. On August 5, 2005, the court sentenced John Sharp to 2 consecutive life terms, with a non-parole period of 33 years. In court, he sat with his head down, breathing heavily and wiping away tears, not for Anna or Gracie, but for himself. Following his conviction, more disturbing details came to light. Members of John's extended family disclosed that he had abused a young relative for 2 years, only stopping when she turned 18. The victim expressed that the most painful part wasn't just the abuse itself, but the realization that if she had spoken out sooner, perhaps Anna and Gracie would still be alive. After the trial, 3 more individuals came forward, claiming John had previously behaved inappropriately around children, both within the family and in other close settings. For years, no one spoke up. The victims, still children at the time, were too frightened. It was only after the murders that they finally found the courage to break their silence. John's relatives say that Anna was unaware of his past when they got married, but she later might have learned something. Both Anna and Gracie were buried under Anna's maiden name, Kemp. There was also a name engraved on the stone: Francis, their unborn son who never had a chance. Even though he never drew breath, he is remembered. The crimes committed by John shocked Australia and the world. A father who harmed the very people he was supposed to protect. He left behind deep sorrow and unanswered questions that may never be resolved. John resides in protective custody while incarcerated due to threats on his life from fellow prisoners.